Hello. Hofday, good morning. The Committee on Infrastructure, Economic Development, Simon Sanchez High School, Disability Services, Self-Determination, Historic Preservation, Housing, Public Economy, and the Guam Build-Up, and the Committee on Human Resources, Hagatina Revitalization, Regional Affairs, Public Libraries, Telecommunication, Technology, Federal and Foreign Affairs reconvenes this oversight hearing. The time is now 8:39. Apologies for technical difficulties. And I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that today is Wednesday, April 19, 2023, and that public notice was satisfied on the previous hearing. So the agenda for this oversight hearing includes the following: business privilege tax on military construction contracts, OPA report number 23-03, March 23, and the 37 GL 2-23-0215 Office of Public Accountability OPA report 23-02, Department of Revenue Taxation Assessment and Collections and Excess Taxes on alcohol beverages and tobacco products. The agenda and materials for today's oversight has been printed and has been shared in the drive. I'd like to recognize my colleagues joining me this morning: Senator Tom Fisher to my right, and Vice Speaker Tina Rose Munoz Barnes to my left. Thank you guys for joining me. Before the recess, I asked the members to provide their 2 questions to allow time for OPA and DRT to prepare responses. Before I introduce our representatives joining us this morning to begin their presentation, I'm going to reinstate those rules of engagement and conduct. We will have 2 rounds per item. First round is for presentation. Second round is for questions and answers. 5 minutes for discussion. Each senator is allotted 2 questions per item. For the conduct of this oversight, the chair shall recognize individuals presenting, and individuals must state their name and for the record-keeping purposes. Discussion, questions, and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Individuals speaking shall only use respectful language and professional language and conduct. Personal interference about the character or motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. All must abide by the rules and conduct of the quality assurance standards. The chairperson of the committee may order the removal from the hearing in the committee or subcommittee of any person who is not a member of Lias Guahan and who fails to observe proper decorum, according to the 37th Guam Legislature Standing Rules. Any violations of this rule will result in the removal from the hearing. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. I recognize Vice Speaker to give her brief remarks.
Sidzus Masi, Mr. Chair, and Manana Sidzus, to my colleagues and to the presenters here this morning, Public Auditor, former Speaker BJ, and of course Daphne, Marie, and Vince. Thank you so much for being here this morning. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for bringing us back from recess. And if I may, I'd like to just, I wanted to reiterate the timeline of the audit in working closely with the Office of Public Accountability. Mr. Chair, on May 25th, 2021, in my capacity as the chairperson on the Guam Military Buildup and Public Accountability, I requested that Public Auditor Benjamin J.F. Cruz conduct an audit on the military construction contracts. As a part of my request, it was included was a research conducted by my committee to determine whether recipients of defense contracts were filing and paying their taxes on Guam as mandated by the Guam law. Findings from a 1998 and a 2014 audit conducted by the United States Department of Interior's Office of the Inspector General, which highlighted deficiencies of the government of Guam as it related to collection of taxes from federal contractors, were also appended to my request. And lastly, our request to the public auditor included recommendations made by my committee at that time. On March 13th, 2023, after an extensive audit, the Office of Public Accountability released OPA report number 23-03 relative to the collection of business privilege taxes on military construction contracts. I want to, Mr. Chair, thank our auditor, our public auditor, Speaker Cruz, and his team for definitely not giving up on this effort. And to address the findings of Public Auditor Cruz, I have begun conversations with my colleagues, Congressman Moylan and Joint Region Marianas, to determine how we can move forward. At the same time, Mr. Chair, as these are federal dollars owed to Guam, I will be writing to the appropriate federal and local enforcement authorities to ensure that Guam receives the taxes it's rightfully owed. As stated in a letter from the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, non-compliance with Guam laws by contractors are a violation of their contract terms. And as we begin budget deliberations, my goal is to ensure that these issues are resolved by the end of this fiscal year. Today, Mr. Chair, we begin the task of improving our ability to collect these taxes by discussing what assistance the Department of Revenue and Taxation needs to do so. But I would be remiss, Mr. Chair, without acknowledging your work and, of course, the Director Shimizu and your staff for the work that you've done throughout the pandemic and prior. And of course, you and OTEC have been able to streamline government services by bringing it online. And I must say that this is truly a game changer for many of us. And as personally experienced in the last week or so, it has made it so much easier for our residents to do their I guess their responsibility working closely with DRT. So I really want to take the time to thank you for that. And with that being said, Mr. Chair, we are here to find solutions to assist you, and thank you for taking, both agencies for taking the time to be here. I know that Department of Revenue and Tax is wrapping up the tax season, and we're very, very appreciative of your presence here, and of course OPA for always doing the hard work with I want to say, I know, minimal staff, and hoping to see how we can get all the resources to you guys to make sure that programs like this don't get lost, and that everything is being followed accordingly by the statutes of Guam. So, Mr. Chair, and Dunkalun and Sidus Masi for letting me join you on this joint hearing and presentation this morning, so that our listening audience here on Guam can understand what's been happening with the program and how we can recover if there's anything missing. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Saina Masi.
Sidus Masi, Vice Speaker. I recognize my colleague to my right, Senator Fisher, for brief remarks.
I will defer to the chair.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and recognize Speaker BJ.
With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, I think it would be fair. The audit of the public auditor the Office of Public Accountability has been out in the public for a couple of weeks now, a month. And I think it would only be fair if we allow Revenue and Taxation to do their presentations, and then we'll respond to it. But I think they should be allowed to get their point of view out first, if that's possible.
Okay. We'll proceed with Ms. Daphne Shimizu, DRT.
Thank you so much, Senator Quinata. We do have a presentation which we did provide to the AV team. So there also is a hard.
Thank you.
Thank you. And first off, I wanted to say thank you again for this opportunity. And through this presentation, we hope to lay the foundation for just kind of some basic concepts that are involved and are important to understand as we analyze and evaluate the BPT for contractors and what's involved with construction contracting and military construction contracting, which is what the topic of this particular audit was for. And I also want to share that, of course, we really do appreciate the work of the public auditor and, of course, of the OPA team. We may not necessarily always agree on concepts or on even maybe perhaps how to approach a an item. But I think that what we, especially in the last couple of weeks, have had really great conversations on, and what I do believe agree on, is that ultimately we're really here to work together to make things better for our people. And so, and although, again, we may not necessarily agree on approach, we definitely agree that we know what we're here for, and I am confident that we're going to work together to make sure that we accomplish what needs to get done. And so, before I start, I do want to share as well that when I did start at the Department of Revenue and Taxation in 2019, and I know Vice Speaker did also speak a little bit about the Inspector General audit that occurred in 2014, right? And so even since my understanding, based on my communications with my team, is that even after that particular audit occurred, there was some work that was done. And now I was not involved directly in it because I did not start until 2019, but I can say even in 2019, our team did undertake a bit of an effort to try to address the issue of military contractors. And then, of course, 2020 and 2021, that particular effort, 2020 definitely, that particular effort kind of waned as decreased as we, began to work to address the issue of COVID. And then 2021, early 2021, our team revisited the process, and what they did do was work to refine what they believe the process should be, so that way we could address the issue of military contractors. So we looked at what we did before, tried to come up with procedures that we thought may address the issue better, and then we worked to try to implement that in 2021. And so today, to go to the presentation, today we'll be going through the BPT and the business license basics for contractors. And again, this was an expansion of a presentation that I had done, or that our team had done at the Guam Contractors Association meeting back in March 2023. And so we can move to this next page. And so we'll be going through what is a contractor, what types of contractors work on a construction project, the business license requirements for contractors. We'll talk about the tax on contractors, which can be found in 11 GCA, Chapter 26, Section 26202E, the Form GRT-1 and Schedule GRT-E, which are the forms that are required to be filed, factors to consider when analyzing BPT for construction contractors, and then we'll go into the OPA report results and our response to those results, and then what we have to look forward to and what our conclusions are. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. So what is a contractor? And of course, the term contractor is used in many different areas. If you look at Merriam-Webster Dictionary online, it says contractor is one that contracts or is a party to a contract, such as one that contracts to perform work or provide supplies. Sometimes we refer to contractors as independent contractors. And in fact, the term contractor can be a little bit vague because we sometimes use it synonymous with the term organization, business, company, right? And so I just kind of wanted to lay that kind of out. So when we talk about contractors, it's important to, again, distinguish the type of contractors. So there are contractors in general, businesses, independent contractors. Then there are contractors like, for example, military construction contractors, or contractors that do actual construction work. Next slide, please. So, and what types of contractors work on construction projects? So as we, again, think about the type of businesses perhaps, or that work on construction projects, we know that, of course, there's the construction contractor, and they probably take up the majority of the amount of work that's done on a construction project, but they're not the only types of contractors, right? And again, if we talk about types of businesses that actually work on a construction project, there are also architects, engineers, and land surveyors. Next slide, please. But the law does define what a contractor is, and in particular, Title 11 really is the DRT. It's really about DRT. So 11 GCA 26101B is where you can find the definition of a contractor. And when we're talking about contractors here, we're talking about primary and subcontractors, and these are, and I'll go through the definition, but these are really construction contractors. So in the law, 11 GCA, it states that a primary contractor shall include every person engaging in the business of contracting to erect, construct, repair, or improve any installation of any kind or description, or to provide under contract any service or material for the erection, construction, repair, or improvement of any installation, or to provide under contract labor to another for any purpose or use whatsoever, including any other service or products that the project may require, right? And so that's really describing kind of like a construction contract, or what we know as a construction contract. And a subcontractor shall include every person engaging in the business of providing labor, products, or services to a primary contractor for a specific project. And it's important to note, that even though we may have, so that a single contractor can actually be a prime contractor and a subcontractor at the same time, but of course for another, if they're a sub, they're a sub for somebody else. If they're a prime, then they are the actual contractor that has the contract directly with the federal government or with whoever it is that is their customer. Next slide, please. And so there are business license requirements for contractors, and this is very important, again, to lay the foundation for understanding what is required. So in general, all contractors doing business on Guam are required to be duly licensed by the Contractors License Board. But there is an exception to this, right? So all contractors should be licensed, but there is an exception that is permitted in the case of a foreign or an off-island contractor doing work exclusively on military installations on Guam. Next slide, please. So there was a Guam Attorney General's opinion, and it was opinion CLB 93-0543 that was dated in June 17, 1993. And that particular AG opinion stated that with the exception of domestic contractors, contractors with contracts exclusively on military installations are not required to obtain a contractor's license with the CLB. So, although again, the CLB is generally the licensing authority for construction contractors, the exception is for those contractors that are not Guam contractors, meaning they're not incorporated or organized on Guam, and they do not do any business outside of a federal military installation, meaning they only basically do business on the base, or it could be at the U.S. District Court, right? So not necessarily on the base, but for a federal construction contract, right? But if they do fall in that category, meaning that they're non-Guam and they only do business for a federal construction contract or on the base, they still have to do a few things. One, they have to register and apply for the Certificate of Registration or Certificate of Authority with the DRT General Licensing Branch. And two, they still actually have to obtain a business license from the Guam Department of Revenue and Taxation. Next slide, please. Okay. So, who licenses contractors for construction contracts? And this is important as well. So the Department of Revenue and Taxation, as you mentioned, does actually issue licenses or business licenses for construction contractors. And again, those that are only on the base, those that do not fall under CLB. But for the other types of contractors, or if you want to call them businesses, that actually are involved in a construction contract, right? And those are architects, engineers, land surveyors, and also, again, other contractors. The licensing authority could be the Guam Board of Registration for Professional Engineers, Architects, and Land Surveyors, which we know as PEALS, or it could be CLB, right? So again, there are three basic places, and this is not all-inclusive. There may be other types of businesses that are involved in construction, but in general, for construction contracts, when you're going to build something, and I know even when I was looking to build a home, I had to go to like a engineering firm to do my soil testing, right? So and I had to go and hire an engineer in order to help me with the plans and an architect to look at that. And so again, there are different types of businesses, we call contractors, that are not necessarily construction that are involved when it comes to a construction project. Next slide, please. So there is a tax on contractors. And 11 GCA Chapter 26, Section 26202E does speak of or indicates what that tax is. It states there shall be levied, assessed, and collected at a tax rate of 5% measured against the gross income of any contractor, provided that there shall be deducted from the gross income of the taxpayer so much thereof as has been included in the gross income earned from another taxpayer who is a contractor as defined in 26101B, which is a subcontractor, a prime contractor, and who has already paid the tax levied under this subsection for goods and services that include the deductible gross income of the taxpayer who is a contractor. So in general, contractors should pay 5%. However, there was Public Law 30-230 that was enacted in 2011, and that allowed for the subcontractor to take an exemption. Next slide, please. So prior to March 2011, when Public Law 30-230 went into effect, it was the prime contractor that actually was able to take the exemption for GRT or BPT. After that, in March 2011, it became the sub. And why was Public Law 30-230 enacted? Ultimately, it was really to help to develop subcontractors and, of course, to be able to shift the payment of BPT from subcontractors to the prime because, of course, there is the basic idea or thought that it's likely the prime that has more financial resources than a sub. And so that is why Public Law 30-230 was enacted. Next slide, please. And even though there is this exemption, when you do file your BPT return, or when a subcontractor does file their BPT and they are going to take the exemption, they have to provide certain information on their return to include the contractor's license number issued by CLB, their Guam business license number, their registration number for a professional engineer, architect, or land surveyor, or their COA number for a business that's authorized to provide engineering, architecture, or land surveying services by PEALS. Next slide, please. And so I wanted to show you what the form looks like, the form GRT1 and the schedule GRTE, just again so you have a basic understanding. Next slide, please. So this is the form GRT1, and if you'll notice, for those people who actually probably file their BPT returns themselves, or maybe your accountants, they're very familiar with this. But if you look in Part 1, there is, starting with number 1, all the way to number 13, there's wholesaling, retailing, service, rental, real property, rental others, profession, commission, insurance premiums. Then 9 and 10 are what we usually associate with contractors or construction contracting, which is contracting local and contracting U.S. And then, of course, lines 11, 12, and 13, which are interest, amusement, and others, respectively. Next slide, please. So, of course, as we were talking with the Guam Contractors Association, even as I was talking with my team, we did have a question, or I had a question about what does line 9 and 10 mean? When we say contracting local, does that mean contracting receipts that are received from contracting projects that are for outside the base? And does contracting U.S. mean receipts for those that are on base? So it wasn't clear. And so we were able to clarify that line 9, which is contracting local, is to be used by those construction companies which are Guam-based or domestic, meaning that they're actually Guam businesses, right? They're organized on Guam. Line 10 is for, although it says contracting U.S., it's actually quite confusing because really it means any non-Guam or non-domestic. So you could be a foreign company and you would have to report on line 10. Okay? Next slide, please. And this is the schedule GRTE. And I wanted to share this with you. On the left side of the screen, that is where, if you are a subcontractor and you're going to take the subcontractor exemption, you would enter your information. You would enter your EIN or social security number, your GRT account number, the month or year. You're going to indicate what is the form that you're filing for, the exemption number, and then if you look on the second row of boxes, the fourth set where it says contractor's license number, right? So there is actually a place to indicate contractor's license number, and then below that, the name of the contractor. So again, when you do take an exemption for the Public Law 30-230, there is a requirement that you enter this information. Next slide, please. And then this is just, again, just kind of a reiteration of what we talked about before, where the information that if you are going to take Public Law 30-230 as an exemption, then you'll have to enter that information, the contractor's license number, et cetera. Next slide, please. But there are some factors to consider when analyzing BPT for construction contracts. Number one is period of performance. And so period of performance, if you look on usaspending.gov, there will be a start date, there will be an end date, right? And so, the period that a contractor actually does the work, that is, of course, very important to consider. It's also important to note that even as I've talked with some contractors, they have indicated that although they're slated to complete a project in a certain time, that because of various factors, there have been delays. It could be delays because of permitting. It could be delays because of increases in construction cost. It could be delays, and again, so those all kind of add up, and we did also see delays previously because of chain supply issues, right? So again, period of performance, right? The start date and the end date. And period of performance is not necessarily going to coincide with the period that payments are received or are required to be reported for BPT purposes, right? So again, that's kind of important to understand. The place of performance, right? And so of course, although, the place of performance, when you indicate, you can actually select that on usaspending.gov, you can select Guam. There are, or perhaps may be times that a contractor may do work, but may not necessarily step on Guam or may not, have actually conducted the work on Guam. And so again, place of performance, although it may be Guam, if a contractor does not actually do the work or conduct the work on Guam, then that particular revenue or gross receipt is not going to be subject to BPT. So then we just wanted to also indicate change orders, but accounting methods, right? So there's accrual method of accounting and there is cash method of accounting. And so again, some contractors may have accrual method of accounting, some contractors may have cash method of accounting. Cash method of accounting means that you report your gross receipts based on the cash you received. Accrual is based on when it's earned. And so again, those also impact the actual BPT that's received or paid or reported. We talk about joint ventures because that's also an issue or concern, and I know just to kind of go into a little bit of detail on that. So there, something that we did indicate in our response that we agreed about the issue of joint ventures, which is, and a joint venture is basically a situation where you can have a couple of organizations that enter into an agreement to perform a certain project or to do something. And what we're going to go into later is, the question as to whether or not both of the licensing, separate licensing for those particular entities is sufficient, meaning that if Company A and Company B both have separate licenses and are registered in Guam and are filing their returns, is that sufficient? Or is there a need for them to have a separate joint venture license that is combined for the both of them? And then again, BPT exemptions, because there are several BPT exemptions. And again, we talked about Public Law 30-230, but there also are other exemptions, and we'll go into that a little bit. Next slide, please. And so here, we're going to go through the OPA report 23-03 results. Next slide, please. And so this pie chart shows the full amount of the classification of monetary amounts, the total financial impact that was indicated in OPA report 2023-03. And so how it's broken down is 20% is for federal contractors reported as non-filers and without gross receipts and BPT records with DRT. 2% is for contractors tagged as filers who reported 0 gross receipts and BPT for 5 years. 30% is for variances between reported gross receipts compared with awarded contract amounts. 33% is for calculated BPT rates, which were indicated as being way below the mandated 4% or 5% due to potential exemptions claimed. 3% was for exemptions claimed for exemption code E42, which is Public Law 30-230, which we talked about a little bit earlier. 1%, or about 1%, was for exemption code E40, which was claimed with, was indicated as being claimed without documentation, and then 7% was indicated as deficiencies in the 1% BPT exemption per Public Law 34116 and 3487. And if you recall, Public Law 3487 actually was the public law that increased the BPT back in 2018 from 4% to 5%, but which allowed for an exemption of 1% for those businesses that had existing contracts that did not allow for those businesses to, or that did not take into consideration that there was going to be an increase in BPT. So there was a little bit of an allowance for those, there was an allowance that was allowed or indicated in the law or authorized by law for those particular contracts. Next slide, please. And so I wanted to go through our DRT's responses on the final OPA report, and wanted to share, of course, there, and again, as I know Vice Speaker did mention, the Public Auditor's Office had worked for many months on this, and they worked very hard on this, and so there was a lot of communication back and forth. And in the midst of it all, we had at Rev and Tax, even prior to me starting in 2019, have not had a permanent supervisor in BPT. So even before 2019, we had someone in acting capacity, and probably since then, we've probably had about 3 or 4 people in acting capacity there. And we've had that particular position announced open, but have not been successful at getting someone to apply for that particular position. And so next slide, please. And I'm sorry if it's a little bit tiny. So as we looked at the OPA report, and what we tried to do was align the classification of monetary amounts with the findings to the, I guess, to the replies that we had provided previously. And because there were some changes in the formatting and maybe numbers, we created our own table. So if you look, the first column is finding descriptions. The second column is the OPA's reply to our response from January 13, 2023. And then the third column is our response to the OPA final report. And then the final column is the estimated adjustment, what we believe needs to be considered as to reduce the amount, that $22 million that we saw earlier. So the first, on this page, page 21, the finding description was contracting gross receipts and business privilege taxes. And on the reply from the OPA, it stated, and this is specifically talking about contractors I and II, which of course these are not the real names of the contractors, but it said, based on our recommendation, DRT has to determine if joint ventures should file separate gross receipts as a separate entity, which DRT concurred in their response. And our response to that is that although perhaps we still are in need of making sure that we address the issue of joint ventures, meaning whether joint ventures really should be filing or have a separate business license from the individual entities themselves, right? Our response is that contractors I and II are actually filing GRT returns and paying the taxes or paying taxes. So that estimated adjustment amount is a subtraction of $3 million. When we move to the next item, contracting gross receipts, again, this is actually the same section of the report. And if you look to the OPA reply, contractor P, based on DRT's response, it filed GRT for fiscal year 2016 to 2018 under a new name. But the new name became effective only on January 14, 2019, and so because of this, the finding remains. And our response to that is, contractor P had a performance period of 2015 to 2018, and the name changed in 2019. And at the time that it filed its returns under its old name, it actually filed returns and it did pay BPT. And so the name change doesn't impact BPT, and so we believe that it's the impact which was indicated in the public auditor's report of, I believe it was over 500,000, should also be, again, considered or recommended to be reduced from the 22 million. If we go to the third item, contractor tagged as filer reported 0 gross receipts and business privilege tax for 5 years. And the OPA reply was, we acknowledge DRT's reply. And our response to that was, as indicated on page 15 of the final report, contractor TT filed gross receipts of over $5 million for services and under $500,000 for contracting U.S. Performance period was October 2017 through September 2024. So there's actually still 2 years left for the contract performance, meaning the performance period for this contract has not ended. It still has at least 1 year from now, but 2 years from the end of, I guess, the information that was provided to the public auditor. So from September 2020 through September 2022, contractor TT reported over $8.5 million in gross receipts and paid over $400,000 in gross receipts taxes. And so the estimated adjustment actually is the full amount that was showing in the classification of monetary amounts, which is $536,086. Next slide, please. And so, again, this is a continuation of what we believe needs to be really considered and adjusted out of the $22 million that was indicated. The first item here, a contractor tagged as DRT filer filed 0 gross receipts in a certain fiscal year. In our response in January 2023, per our response in November 2022, contractor F filed only for services and profession and this is the OPA reply to our response. So because they filed only for service and profession, and remember, that's not in lines 9 or 10, meaning that's not in construction contracting, right? The finding by the OPA remained. And our response is, contractor F is licensed by the Appeals Board. The term contractor has multiple meanings. There are professional firms involved in construction projects, and this is a professional firm that is licensed by Appeals. Professional firms may report under service or profession, and that we recommend that the OPA should consider and include lines 9 and 10 in their analysis. And so what we're saying is because we believe that they're, again, contractor F as an actual, likely an engineer or architect that is licensed by Appeals, that it's perhaps not reasonable to consider or to indicate that they should be filing under lines 9 or 10 when they are actually filing and paying BPT. And the estimated adjustment is the full amount of the adjustment that's showing on the classification of monetary amounts, which is $836,737. The next item is variances between reported gross receipts compared with awarded contract amounts. And the OPA's response was calculated deficiencies are based on DRT provided data. DRT justification is noted. And our response is note that there are several contractors in the table that are reporting what OPA has calculated. So if you actually go to the OPA's report, and I don't have the table number, but you'll find that there are lots of contractors in that particular table, and they're actually excess, or meaning overages, meaning when they've calculated the amount of BPT that was either due or paid, that the amounts were, there was quite a few contractors that had, or that were paying in excess of what the OPA had considered to be the amount that should be paid. However, in the report itself, the OPA report only considered the 3 contractors that were showing as less. And in this particular one, we wanted to call out contractor J in particular. Contractor J filed gross receipts of $219.3 million for contracting local for tax period August 2018 to September 2022. Contractor O filed gross receipts of $66.1 million for contracting local for tax period August 2016 to August 2022. And the actual calculated potential unpaid amount, when using the information prepared by the OPA, although they were using estimates, and in the report it says under $500,000, the amount is about $135,000. And again, that's based on the OPA's calculated gross receipts amount. Contractor Z filed gross receipts of $17.1 million for contracting U.S. for tax period August 2016 to August 2022. And again, based on the OPA's calculation of what gross receipts should have been, the amount is about $246,000. And that $6.4 million adjustment is actually only for contractor J, but again, we believe that that amount should be adjusted out. And then the last item on this page, calculated business privilege tax rates are way below the mandated 4 or 5% rate due to potential exemptions claimed. And the OPA reply to our response in January was, rate deficiencies correspond to the difference between the BPT rate that should be collected versus the actual rate of BPT paid. And our response is, yes, it actually, it is reasonable that the rates calculated are going to be less than 5%. And again, a lot of the larger contractors, they serve as both a prime and a sub. And when you are a prime, you pay the full amount of taxes. When you're a sub, you don't pay BPT. Somebody does pay the BPT, so there is still somebody paying the BPT, but there is just not that double BPT payment. And so that amount is $7,486,374. And again, it's not to say that it does not need to be looked at, but from our perspective at DRT, we believe that that full amount really should be reduced from the $22 million. And when we go to page 23, please, the next slide. Finding description. Exemptions claimed for exemption code E42, Public Law 30-230, cannot be identified if filer is a prime or sub. And the OPA's response to our January response was, the exemptions were questionable because they did not have sufficient supporting documentation to validate exemptions as specified within the DRT website. And our response is that although the DRT website indicates that any exemption or deduction claimed under column B, page 1 of the return, must be shown on the above schedule and must be sufficiently supported by documentation, perhaps this is vague. However, the law itself does not require supporting documents for the exemption. And so the amount that was, I guess, indicated as a question amount or a monetary amount really is relating to the issue of not sufficient documentation, again, which isn't required by law. Now, it is required that if we do audit or we do, send a notice to a taxpayer requesting for the supporting documentation, that they do provide it. But that, again, particular information is not required to be submitted when a BPT return is filed. And so that adjustment is $579,164. The next item is exemption code E40 claimed without documentation. The DRT website specified that any exemption or deduction claimed must be sufficiently supported by documentation. And again, this particular exemption does not require, again, any documentation to be filed with the actual return. And unless we're actually conducting an audit, we will not have that information. Again, filing of returns, income tax returns, right? There's a term or concept called voluntary. It's voluntary, right? People file their BPT returns, and so voluntary compliance. And so the estimated adjustment for that is $115,181. Next slide, please. And in this last particular finding, it states deficiencies in the 1% BPT exemption per Public Law number 34-116 and Public Law 34-87. Total other financial impact foregone, revenue is changed to over $1 million, which is the total amount of exemptions claimed with deficiencies mentioned in Table 7. Now, for this particular exemption, the law does require supporting documents. And so in this particular exemption, we didn't look at it in detail, but we actually do agree that if that's the case, that those ones are not properly supported. However, the issue was that the amount showing in the classification of monetary amounts was not the tax, but was the gross receipts, right? So it was the portion, it was the amount that should have been, it should be really 1%, the 1% exemption that should be the amount that's determined to be if there is any deficiency. And so although we agree that that particular exemption should be, supporting documents should be provided, the amount is not correct in the report. And so the amount of $1,463,538 needs to be reduced by the amount that it really should be, which is 1% of that, or $14,635,000. And so the difference between those two amounts is $1,448,903. Next slide, please. And so this is just basically a summary of our recommended adjustments, at least preliminary recommended adjustments to the OPA report 2023-03. So the overall total from the OPA report and the classification of amounts is $22,453,036. And the adjustments that were listed in the previous pages or slides was $20,902,000 and $20,902,445. And so the estimated preliminary adjusted overall total, and again, this is, these numbers are not like final numbers. This is not like this is if we had audited everybody, that this is the amount it would be. But again, this is just based on looking at the numbers that were presented in the report and then going back and, again, looking at the reasonableness of them, looking at them against the law and trying to identify perhaps what, should be adjusted out. And of course, the question is, whether it's 22 million or whether it's 1.5 million, is any amount of a leak even acceptable, right? Because ultimately is the number, is it acceptable? And of course it's not acceptable. I mean, that's why we have an exam group, right? We actually have an examination branch. And how, just to share, because I know we do have some new senators here. So at the Department of Revenue and Taxation, we have our taxpayer services branch and we have division, and we have our tax enforcement division. In our tax enforcement division, we have our collections branch, we have our examination branch, and we have our criminal investigation branch. And the way that we have set up those branches or divisions actually mirrors what the IRS does, right? They also have we've heard recently about, the gun carrying CI, group that the IRS is going to be hiring. We have a CI group as well in our agency. We have revenue agents who also do examinations. And again, we have an examination or audit branch. And then we have a collections branch, revenue officers. And so again, those mirror what the IRS has. So, there are, and the IRS themselves, they recognize, and that's why they do have the branch, that there is a need to do examinations and audits, that there is a need to have a collections arm because, there's a need to go out and collect monies. So it's not to say that any amount of a leak is going to be acceptable. But what I can say is that our team is working on it, and we have been working on it even since 2019 and probably prior. And of course, I have received several calls, texts, messages about, how could Rev and Tax be leaking $22.4 million? And again, the amount is probably not, any amount of leak is concerning. But we wanted to make sure that we address, again based against the law and based on the factors that we presented earlier about who licenses, performance periods, accounting methods, right? And again, all those other factors that impact really whatever the amount is that is being presented. And so if you'll go to the next slide, please. So the outlook and conclusion, and of course, what we did undertake in 2021, beginning in probably early 2021 and late 2020, is what we call phase one of our CIP, or our federal contractor, military contractor project. And our examination group actually worked on phase one. And we did note in our responses, and the public auditor's team is aware, that we intend to begin what we call phase two of our compliance, our compliance review, because it's not a full audit, it's a review. And so that is something that's slated to start in this quarter, beginning April. Also, some things that we had considered as well is changing some of the forms. And because again, it is confusing that it says contracting US and contracting local. And I don't know, of course, at the time that those particular lines 9 and 10, or the form they were contemplated, perhaps it was, I'm not sure that it's accomplishing what was intended in the beginning. What did it have to do with the military buildup back in the 80s? And again, that's something we need to look at. And so looking at the forms to help facilitate it in administration and enforcement, those are things that we need to consider. But also, we always have to consider taxpayer rights as well, right? And so as we look at all this, we also have to consider taxpayer rights. Something, again, that I have mentioned, and which likely the public auditor will also speak on, is, continued collaboration with the public auditor. And again, I've really appreciated the conversations that we've had over the last couple months, and When I did go to the Association of Government Accountants National Conference in Washington, D.C. in February, and there was a panel, and I mentioned this last week, there was a panel that included members of the Inspector General's office and then grantees who are recipients of federal monies that, of course, fall under the purview of the Inspector General. And they talked about collaboration and just this idea of it's not like a I gotcha kind of, hey, magatsa, right? It is a partnership, and it's working in collaboration with grantees so that way there is, I think there's more of like it helps put people at ease as they're working, and it becomes like a positive effort as to how we can make things better. Because again, ultimately, the idea is to try to, again, make sure that people are paying their taxes, that programs are running as they should. And of course, and I did talk with the public auditor earlier about this, communication with DFAS or other federal agencies, and the public auditor did remind me that a couple of months ago at least, he did mention to me, of course, reaching out to the admiral regarding this, and that's something, that we have not done yet. But again, and that's our conclusion, and if you go to the last page, and with that, I'd just like to say, Sidus Maasi, Senator Quinata, and I apologize for not recognizing you all, Vice Speaker Barnes, Senator Fisher, and of course our Oversight Chair, Senator Perez, for this opportunity to share this information, and we are here to answer any questions you may have regarding this.
Good morning. Yes, I was just intending to introduce my colleague, Senator Sabina Perez, Oversight for DRT. Thank you for joining me this morning. And then can we have a response from OPA on this?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Senators Fisher, Vice Speaker Munya Barnes, and Senator Perez. The OPA is not going to try to respond to each one of the responses and as assertions of the Department of Revenue and Taxation. I think everything should have been just the last 3 minutes of her presentation. That they've admitted that they did start phase 1 in 2021. In their response to us, they said that their phase 1 showed that there was 78% compliance. There's been no response on what happened to the 22% and how have you addressed it. They've admitted that there should be a phase 2, which is the audit or the examination, that it's going to start this month. We were told it was going to start during the second quarter of this year, which was March. They've been talking about having audits and examinations for 2 years, the entire time that we were doing this audit. It has to start. All of their allegations or their assertions of how much should be subtracted is all academic. It's academic until such time as she accepts and takes up the very gracious offer by the Admiral to make the introduction to DFAS. Until we meet with DFAS, we will never know how much exactly has been paid to the contractors that have been working on Guam. We don't know when they started, whether it was a contract period. We don't know when they started. We don't know when they finished. We don't know what other calculations, overages, under, whatever. We don't know. And so, I commend my staff for making some kind of calculation, but it's all academic. Until you can say, I know that you made $100 million and that you owe me $4 million if your contract was before 2018, or you owe me $5 million if it was after 2018, we don't know. I'm glad that they admitted that they need to redo their forms, because in our audit, we did point out that the problem was documentation. And to split hairs and say the law doesn't require documentation, but not to audit to determine whether or not, in fact, they are the sub or they are the JV or that they're paying their share, is negligent. And so, you know, there has to be something done. And as I've tried, and you've seen, I've been trying to be as collaborative as possible. I've been as complimentary of the BPT section that has done an exceptional job collecting over $400 million a year with a staff of 8. Their examination division, by their own admission, has not been doing any examinations of any of these. They are doing some. I have to give them credit. The other day, a good friend of mine called me, and she got a letter from Revenue and Taxation that she had underpaid her taxes. So I know they're doing auditing. She underpaid her taxes by 8 cents. And the penalty is the $50 for underpayment and the 8 cents. But there hasn't been one audit of the over 100 contractors yet. And before 2019, I know that they were doing their examinations, because within 2 weeks of my filing of my tax return one year, I got a notice from them that I was short $200. So I know they're capable of doing something. The unfortunate thing is they've not been looking at these. And I understand, because these are huge. And they're very difficult to examine, but they have to be examined at some point. The documentation has to somehow be confirmed. With that, I'll just end, unless you have questions. But I'm glad that in their conclusion, they admitted that they haven't started phase 2, which means examinations and audits. They have not met with the DFAS, which will confirm the amounts that we should be collecting, and that the forms need to be amended. And so I have to commend them and thank them for making that admission, in spite of 10 pages of trying to subtract the number. It's not the issue of the number. No leakage is appropriate or acceptable. And, you know, this afternoon at 3 o'clock, I'm meeting with a young man who's doing his doctoral dissertation on implementing recommendations. As was mentioned by the director, we do these not to say, gotcha. We do these in the hopes of trying to improve collections. And because I want to make sure that we have enough collections to pay for everything that we want and need. And so I'm not going to go line by line. I'll just say I want to thank them for their conclusion and their admission of what they need to do, because that is imperative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll go ahead and yield to Vice Speaker Tina Rosemary Barnes.
Mr. Chair, for literally giving us this opportunity to be here this morning. And as I was listening intently to the presentation, I do want to say thank you to the both of you for doing this. I guess this presentation to the listening body and to us. We look at the outlook and conclusions from the Department of Revenue and Taxation, and we know that there's changes that need to be made. Public Auditor, you talked about, the documentation, the collaboration, and maybe most importantly, the policy change that's needed to update. The left hand should know what the right hand is doing and vice versa. You said, Director Shimizu, that even if the offset is now down from 22 million to 1 million, yeah, it's 1 million. 1 million still needed to come into the coffers, and we must reconcile. And I know it's not easy. I want to say thank you, Public Auditor, for not giving up on me, because when we saw the reports that came in from the U.S. audit, we said, oh my God, what are we doing? And then and then just trying to get the agencies to come together. And I know the work is tedious. So as we look at the conclusions moving forward, I literally had 5 questions to ask, and it dealt with a lot of the breakdown of what you presented. So a lot of the questions were answered. But I did have a firm point to see what changes can be made so that we become more transparent and more open to what is needed from the contractors to the government to the process, for the process. And if it's policy change that we need to do, then let's do it. If the forms need to be updated, if documentation needs to be added, it should be stressed. Even if we as business owners or contractors don't think it's important enough, for us, documentation is key. In order for us to get more grants, in order for us to be more transparent and apparent that these need to be delineated, then we need to add those things. And if the left hand or the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, it's never going to work. But it took this process of going through this to literally find out that it went from 22 million to 1 million, but still an escape of $1 million. That is not acceptable, because we could use that money, that $1 million, for educational safety and health, and even for all the other programs that we need that are not key to that, but also important ingredients that are needed to provide for the basic services that government is responsible for doing. So in the ultimate end, besides the thank yous, I think that collaboration and literally even calling whether it be DFAS or what have you, to update, to see what's going on, to see what needs to be updated, I think is key. And seeing this collaboration, I think when we first started this public hearing last week, you talked about OPA being literally having an office there, that you thought that Mr. Duenas was now permanently employed at Rev and Tax, right? But it's needed, because if we have any resources that is escaping the government of Guam, we need to find a way how to capture it and not let it escape. And for me, I'm not here to bash on anybody. I'm here to say, how do we work this together? As policymakers up here, you see the oversight, you see the former oversight, you see the new oversights today saying, what can we do to help, right? And with the conclusion and the need for update, collaboration, and then more documentation, I think, let us know. Let us know. So if policy change is needed, if you need to change your forms and it needs policy, then let us know. But I think that the reconciling is very, very important. Please.
The Office of Public Accountability does not agree that the amount should be reduced. I personally don't even agree that that the 22 is the amount that's missing. Neither one can say that that is the number that has leaked. What I do know is what the Inspector General's told us, 10 years ago. Unless revenue and taxation closes the loops that they saw problems with, there was a possibility of losing $414 million. That $414 million was not pulled from the sky. The 414 was what they were saying was going to be collected from the $10.5 billion that was going to be invested here. It's $4 million for every $100 million dollars, and so it's 40 million per billion, and so 10 billion is 400 billion, and that's how the Inspector General said that we were going to lose 414 million unless. But we don't know how much has already been paid out. Neither my staff in all of what they got from revenue taxation, and even then we weren't privy to actual returns. It was just what they were going to admit to us. We don't know unless we have something from DVAS that says this amount of the 10 million that was supposed to be invested on Guam, we have to date released 8 million or 9 million. We don't know because we have no report from them. We know that contracts have been signed to the tune of about 8 or 9 billion, but we don't know how much has been paid yet. And then there's the issue, and I'm glad that Senator Fisher's here, because there's something that I have been arguing for a long time. There is this belief that work done elsewhere is not subject to taxes here, to the BPT tax. I beg to differ. Work done elsewhere may not be subject to our withholding or our corporate tax. But work done elsewhere is still part of a contract that was awarded for a contract on Guam. And but for the fact that I got a $30 billion contract to do a project on Guam, but for that fact, I would not have $30 billion for my company. I mean, $30 million for my company. And all the work that's done elsewhere should also be, that entire 30 million should pay a gross receipt tax here. But they believe that work done elsewhere, the 4 billion or 5 million that's paid to the CEO, that's not part of this. But I'm insistent that was part of the 30 million that was had here on Guam. And but for that, you wouldn't have the 5 million to pay the CEO. I'm not asking for the Section 30 withholding income tax on the 5 million, but I'm asking for the 5% on the 5 million that was because it was a contract on Guam. But that's a philosophical difference that hasn't been resolved, but it's something that I think has to be addressed at some point.
Duly noted, Mr. Auditor, and so I'll give you the opportunity to state your comment. Taft, please go ahead.
Yeah, and so I know this is just a dollar figure, but the Inspector General report actually, the amount that was indicated was $414,000, not $414 million. I just wanted to make that clarification. And so 10 years ago, when the Inspector General did their report, it was $414,000. That's all. Thank you.
To the presenters here this morning, we know that based on even this exercise going through and the differences of opinions here, we need to know that there are resources that are still being escaped. And what do we do together to fix that? if the collaboration with DFAS is needed, if the list is needed and provided, what policy can be exchanged or can be detailed in policy so that we can make sure that what is needed to be captured for the projects done for the build-up here is done accordingly. Please.
Respectfully, and thank you so much, Vice Speaker Munoz-Barnes. In the Public Auditor's report, in Appendix 7, there is actually audit recommendations that were provided for, and there are 7 audit recommendations which provide, of course, the audit recommendation itself, the status, and then the actions that are required. And even further to that, they also even contemplate or recommend certain timeframes, certain things to be done. And so I think that as a start, I mean, I know, of course, as we came here, and I did meet Senator Roy Quinata outside, and he mentioned that there was the possibility that there would be an oversight, and I said, okay, thank you. And of course, we're here because we want to make sure we answer the questions regarding this. But I think that to start, perhaps to allow the collaboration between the Public Auditor Office and the Department of Revenue Taxation, so that way we can work on addressing the recommendations that were provided in their final report that came out in March. And, of course, it's April now. And some of the actions required submit a corrective action plan, implement no later than the beginning of the next fiscal year. And I think for the most part, the actions or the recommendations were to allow for at least implementation no later than the beginning of next fiscal year, which I'm assuming is going to start October 1. And so again, I do appreciate the public auditor's comments, and I can actually really appreciate his passion about making sure that this happens. I also have a passion for this too, and I have a passion for my team and the work that they do. And I will tell you, I believe wholeheartedly in the work that we're doing, and perhaps there was a misunderstanding about, or miscommunication about when the CIP Phase 2 project would start, because really we had indicated it would start in the second quarter, perhaps of this calendar year, and maybe it's in the communication, second quarter of the calendar year really starts in April. And so I think to start, Madam Vice Speaker, is to allow the agencies to collaborate and also to take the recommendations that were provided by the public auditor. Yes. And to work toward implementation, or at least communication regarding them, and a pathway toward some level of compromise if we don't agree, and so that we can implement them. But the recommendations all have indicated to implement no later than beginning of the next fiscal year.
Right. So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I think it's important that the requests by the presenters on more continued collaboration and looking at the audit recommendations and the implementation of a timeline, that we do come back with an update to see how far we've gone and how far we've initiated it. Because again, I'll state for the record, Mr. Chair, that on this process alone for the military contracts, I think that DFAS should be included with the communications that come through for the government of Guam. I think that as policymakers, it is critical for us to make sure that these things are facilitated through. And we would never know if we didn't look into it and we didn't reconcile. And this is what the reconciliation is all about. Because as we have the funds coming in, we should know how it's being expended, but we should also recover and make sure that there's a balance, right? That it washes, that if there is a balance, if there is an overage, if there is an underage, that we should know. And yes, even $1 million can go a long way. Even if it's more than that, we should. If the updated audit from the U.S. audit has to be looked at again for further clarification, then it doesn't hurt for us to go back. But as we continue to move this process forward, we too have to make that policy change to assist you guys. But the collaboration is key. And I think that is important. As even respecting the differences of opinions and the differences of justification, but what's written here is how, because we're on the same team. We need to make sure that what is ever being awarded out there, the auditor, Mr. Auditor is right, that yes, that should come our way. Yes.
And might I add, you know, and Public Auditor Cruz did mention this even last week. I'm not sure if it was during a legislative hearing or during the oversight, that even, I mean, you know, the working together, the agencies working together, the branches working together helps because, you know, of course we, I mean, you know, for example, is it possible for us to, you know, get 100% of all speeders, you know, people who go above 35 on the road? Probably not, right? And even if we were to invest all of the police officers that we would need to be stationed in every single point around the island, it's just not going to be possible. But together we can, you know, work to try to address. And I think that one thing, of course, that Public Auditor and even as we talk with his team had mentioned is that they also help in regulating, you know, and although I wasn't involved or familiar, I did watch the public hearing that he had last week Friday, where he did mention that, you know, as they work on audits, as they announce audits, it also motivates taxpayers. And for us, we are totally, you know, in support of the efforts to try to help, you know, us on the regulatory side, if it's going to help motivate taxpayers to come, you know, to come forward and to, you know, desire to make sure that they're in compliance. And so, you know, I wanted to make sure I also, you know, state that because the public auditor has actually mentioned that a few times, and we do think that that's important to note. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Daphne. Mr. Chair, I'll yield back to you at this time and to hear my other colleagues ask their questions, but I think it's important that we continue as a committee to have this joint update because I think it's really key and important as this is why these agencies are here. And if we have the resources that are escaping us, $1 out is $1 lost, and if we don't capture or reconcile what is rightfully due to the government, then we're the ones, our people are the ones that are hurting. So, Mr. Chair, thank you very much, and I literally want to thank the presenters for being here this morning and following up and doing their due diligence to share with the community on what's happening with the military contracts. Sana Masi.
At this time, I yield to Senator Fisher for his comment.
Thank you and good morning. I would like to begin by asking the public auditor to just reiterate what he stated. If I understood it, it's a possibility that we may have missed $400 million based on $10 billion worth of government contracts. Did I misunderstand you?
Well, no, when I read the IG report, I thought it was 414 million. And I tried to figure out where that number came from. Right. And it's very easy to come to. They were going to invest $10 billion on Guam. BPT at the time was 4%. 4% of the 10 billion is 400 million plus change. So we were told, unless you get revenue and taxation fully manned and get all your forms ready and stuff, there's a chance that you could miss out on
400
this 400 that's possible, 400 million that could be coming to Guam.
That's like half a year's budget for the government of Guam.
Yes.
That's a substantial amount of money.
It is.
Okay. So regardless of how it happens, okay, we're missing out potentially, and this is to you, Director Shimizu, we are missing out potentially on $400 million in tax collections. I'm sure that number is going to vary. I'm sure there will be some disagreement. But
well, thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify, and we actually pulled the Inspector General report.
Yeah.
And it indicates to resolve whether Guam is owed the $414,414 in taxes. So just wanted to clarify, the amount from the Inspector General's report is not $414 million.
It's how much?
414,000, and that was from the Inspector General report back in 2014.
Okay, back to the public auditor. That's a huge difference. We're hearing 400 million and then
It is. I'm just saying that the possible collection should be 414 million.
Okay.
They can't tell us today how much of the $400 million that should have come from the $10 billion that was invested in Guam has been received.
Wow.
I would
Okay.
ask somebody to ask them,
Yeah.
can Revenue and Taxation say how much they've collected from these military contractors today?
Okay. Well, that's, I think you'll agree that that is simply unacceptable. That is a huge amount of money. That is potentially the budget for 2 years for the Department of Education, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it was lost. I'm just saying that that's the amount that we should receive from the 10 billion.
Got it, got it.
How much of it has been collected is going to be an academic exercise between us trying to confirm that. I'm insistent that unless DFAS tells us how much has been released and paid to the contractors, we will never know what number we should multiply the 4% or the 5% to.
Well, I think you and I would both agree that that data is collected somewhere in DFAS. Why don't we have it?
I don't know. It's not like all of you business people that submit your W-2 forms for all of your employees.
Right?
You would think DFAS would give us something akin to a W-2 form or a 1099. We don't.
Okay. Well,
And the Admiral has graciously stated that he would introduce the director
okay.
to DFAS, would take them there and introduce them.
Okay, is the director of DFAS on island? I assume not.
No, it's the director of DFAS is in Ohio. I think it's Cleveland.
Okay. Director Shimizu, will you meet with DFAS?
Thank you, Senator Fisher. You know, with regards to DFAS, I know it's been a while, so we did reach out to our counterparts, our federal counterparts, to try to get in communication with DFAS, but that was actually prior to the public auditor meeting with the Admiral. And absolutely, if we're able to meet with the head of DFAS, we will do so. I believe that in prior administrations, that was something that had happened where we actually had people from our agency.
Okay, well,
So it would be great if we could do that.
When do you think that will happen?
I suppose it would depend upon how soon we can connect with them, and of course, if there is, that would depend upon that.
I mean, we're basically at this point just setting up a meeting between you and DFAS.
Actually, I think the public auditor had, just to kind of recap, and please correct me if I'm not stating this correctly, he had met up with the Admiral, who had mentioned that if there is a need to connect the Department of Revenue and Taxation with the head of DFAS, that he could do so.
Do you think there's a need?
Absolutely. That's something that we also have attempted to do. We were not successful through our federal counterparts. So if there is that, and I'd appreciate it. I'm sorry. I know public auditor did mention that a couple months ago, and we had not taken him up on the offer. But absolutely, if it's something we need to work on.
Okay, I think you may agree that it's confounding to a listener. Because we conceive of it as you merely picking up a telephone and saying, I'll be in Cleveland or whatever on Tuesday. Is that wrong? I mean, why can't you? I mean, I understand bureaucracies and so forth, but I mean, we're hearing a situation where we absolutely have to have a piece of information and it's available for us. Let's take it.
Sure. And again, I do appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate your questions as well, Senator Fisher, and I'm not here to make excuses about why perhaps we not be doing something, but I will share with you that, again, our team has been kind of anticipating working on the second phase of this particular project, and actually that has been kind of our focus, and so, that the meeting with DFAS or the connecting with the Admiral is something that we'll work on, and, that's my answer.
Okay.
This time.
Well, I certainly trust in and count on your good faith to make that happen because you know, as painful as it is to say, you know, we all want rev and tax to collect more money. But I wanted to ask you some questions. Assuming there is a large amount of money out there, we want the Department of Revenue and Taxation to collect it, and I know you do too. How can the legislature help you? Do you need more money in the budget process to hire revenue agents, to get qualified lawyers on board? What do you need to collect this money? Because I think it would be, you know, penny wise and pound foolish. And, oh, we don't want to spend more money in rev and tax, and then we forego collection of a bunch of money. So how can we help you?
Well, and so of course the budget hearings will be coming up soon, and we do, well, just to share with you though, kind of give some background. You know, we have actually had some challenges, and I believe that even at the time of the GPP, I think Bill 24-37 public hearing, there was discussion about the difficulty of trying to retain employees in the government of Guam. And, you know, of course, I did not attend that public hearing, but I did provide testimony for that particular bill. But one thing that is happening in our agency is not only are we losing employees to the federal government, we're losing employees to retirement, we're losing employees to the private sector, we're also losing employees to other agencies. And so I believe that the GPP is probably a great first step to all of this, but there really needs to be some addressing of perhaps maybe some type of parity. Because, so for example, in our examination branch, we've lost one person so far, and we'll lose another person this month to the Department of Administration. And as I understand it, you know, revenue, we do mirror the IRS, as I mentioned earlier. We mirror them even in terms of the requirements, and Senator Snockstein is very well aware of that. And so in order to be a revenue agent, you must have not any, it can be any, it cannot just be any bachelor's degree. You must actually have a degree in accounting. And so in our agency, we have very technical, technical positions, right, that require a lot of technical expertise. And the scale, though, so the pay scale for an RA or an accountant, perhaps if you want to call that, in our agency, may not even be or start out at the same scale as at another agency. And so I think, again, the GPP was a great first start, but definitely there is a need to look at the positions and to have some level of parity probably across the government, because really, like, if we are losing people to other agencies, accounting people to other agencies, and if the issue is pay, then maybe there needs to be some trying to level the playing field amongst us as well, because we're ending up just kind of cannibalizing each other. We did last year work on, I believe, if not, I think all of our, looking at all of our PDQs. And a PDQ is a position description qualifications. It's basically like a job description. So in anticipation of the review for the GPP, or the study for the GPP, we did provide and work on 100% of our position description qualifications, so that we can, and if there is actually going to be able to be some kind of a, I don't know what you want to call it, like an internal study with regards to, again, that type of thing. That actually is something I think would be helpful, because we are having issues with that. We are working with the Department of Administration to try to hire. That's something that is, of course, ongoing. And as we have, worked with them, I think that every agency perhaps is a little bit understaffed. And the Department of Administration themselves, they do the hiring, the review, et cetera, for all of the line.
Okay. All right. When we come to the consideration of the budget, I hope you won't be shy about requesting more money for you to accomplish your business, because it's fundamental business of the government of Guam. I know we have other people here. Yeah, okay. I wanted to ask you about you've got a criminal enforcement branch?
Right, we have a criminal investigation branch.
Okay, what are the positions within the criminal investigation branch?
Those are tax investigators. Tax investigators. Tax.
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah, tax investigators.
Tax investigators.
Tax investigators. And are those, that is a skilled position?
Absolutely, yes.
And are the people, how many tax investigators do you have?
I would say in that branch, maybe there were about 7 people.
That doesn't sound like enough to me, but.
Well, I mean, like even if we think about the IRS, in the IRS there's about 70,000 employees, and as I understand it, maybe there's about 2,000 of them that are CI.
Okay, the chairs want me to wrap it up, so I will. Do you have any attorneys that are assigned to the criminal enforcement branch?
So what we do have and what is in the law, and I believe this was a bill or a law that came into place through, I think Senator Robert Klitsky was the one that introduced the bill. So we do have in our law the principal territorial income tax attorney. And the principal territorial income tax attorney, I think that the actual term itself is a little bit misleading because that particular, I'm sorry, Senator Fisher.
I'm sorry, I'm going to try and hurry it up a little bit. Do you have any attorneys on board that have experience litigating tax cases?
No, not tax.
Okay, see, I think you would agree that that's a big problem.
Right, but we are actually, our attorneys, though, we are, there was substitution of counsels that were done for the civil litigation cases that we do have.
You need people with the expertise, and you also need people who know how to litigate.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. I want to recognize my colleague for joining me, Senator Joe Sinogues. Oh, sorry. Back to you, Speaker.
Senators, when I was pushing for the increase for my staff, you will recall I also pushed for increases for the Department of Administration's collections people and for the Department of Revenue and Taxation and Department of Education. All 3 agencies need increases in the salaries for their audit divisions, their finance divisions. The GPP is not going to be enough for Department of Revenue and Taxation. It should be the GMP that Mr. Burns is also contemplating. The general market plan, or is it market plan or professional plan? Market premium pay. That he says it's good, he was proposing for us. But I really think it's also imperative that their employees in their examination and compliance section are included in the market premium plan, because they will never be able to compete. And I don't know how many of you were here last week when we were hearing Bill 47, but one distributor made one comment that was very disturbing. He said, if the government doesn't want to collect taxes, it can disable the collecting agency. And I hadn't thought, that had never been said out loud. And that shocked me. Because unless I'm not claiming that she did it, but the fact is she's inherited a department which has been grossly underpaid. And I'm not sure whether it was a conscious decision by the government to handicap that division. They're paid less than administration, and both are paid less than ours. And all 3 of us are paid less than GPA and GWA. So the market premium pay was intended to try to figure out what the market is paying, and they have got to be included.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to recognize my colleague again, Senator Joe Sinogues, for joining me this morning. And then I'll defer to Senator Sabina Paris.
Thank you, Senator Chair Quinata. So on that note, so Director Shimizu, are you prepared to support a specific pay plan for DRT?
You know, I don't have a specific pay plan that I'm sorry, no. What I believe needs to happen is that we need to perhaps look at similar positions across probably the line. Because again, if we're losing people to other line agencies, because the scale starts a little bit higher and the requirements are not as, for example, there is not an accounting degree required, then that is problematic. And I don't know what kind of a pay plan that is, but again, it's really kind of looking at the positions and determining if they're pretty similar across the agencies, then perhaps the pay should be, you know, pretty similar. And I agree with the public auditor that, you know, I mean, even we had somebody who was a customer service person at GPA and moved over to the Department of Revenue and Taxation for some reason, but that individual actually made more as a customer service person than as a revenue officer who goes out and has a pretty difficult job. Collections is not easy, and you know, of course, we deal with you know, individuals who may not want to be paying taxes. So I don't have a specific pay plan name, or but I do believe again that it's important that we look at the positions within the agency, perhaps benchmark them against what we see, maybe even in IRS. But as you know, even in the discussion of GPP, this issue of brain drain or shortage and, you know, being able to find good qualified people who are willing to work is not unique to Guam. It's something that I think, you know, people are seeing. In fact, I have a good friend who went to CNMI to try to recruit for people to come to work on Guam for a company that she works for, and she held a job fair, and they were going to pay for they were going to pay for their trips, you know, to Guam, back and forth between Guam and CNMI, like quarterly, and, you know, work to help find them housing. And of the people that she was not actually successful at being able to recruit people to come to Guam from CNMI. So I think that the issue of a shortage is a larger issue that's, you know, happening. But again, I do believe that it's important that we look at, and I know we did provide to your office, Senator Pierce, the updated PDQs at your request that we had provided, the position description qualifications. And so I think it's just, that's the start. I know that there is a vendor that the autonomous agencies utilize as they work to address the issue of their pay and what the pay should be for their employees, and perhaps that talking with that vendor would be helpful too, but I don't have a specific name of a pay plan.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, this is an all hands on deck issue. You know, there's a staffing shortage at DRT, particularly with compliance branch. And considering, you know, the Pareto principle, you want to exert 80% of your effort that's going to produce the most impact. And I think, you know, what the, you know, Speaker BJ said is that, you know, we need to put more emphasis on compliance. And so what are you doing to address this shortage currently?
Well, sorry, just excuse me if that's too loud. I wanted to share with you what we're doing just kind of in general. You know, of course, as you know, in this last year, we had, so how we are structured to start with is we have the director, we have the deputy director, and then we have a deputy tax commissioner position. And then below the deputy tax commissioner, we have 6 division heads. They're called administrators. And in this past year, I believe in 2021, we had our deputy tax commissioner had retired, our TRAB administrator retired, our taxpayer service administrator retired, and so we were able to promote from within for the tax enforcement administrator. Actually, that particular administrator had been vacant for years and had somebody in detail capacity for a couple of years. So we have lost people to retirement. So what we did do, and I'll just to share with you, again, there is a lot of technical expertise and experience that's needed. We actually did hire back a few retirees, one in particular, the tribe administrator, and she has a lot of very good tax experience that she's able to and is able to help with our operations. And because, of course, even in our agency, we have issues with, we have 20 branches, and we have 6 divisions. We have about 180 or so employees. And the branches that we have, some of them may not necessarily seem to exactly be related to each other. So for example, we have insurance, securities, banking, real estate compliance, then we have weights and measures, we have general licensing, and we have BPT, and we have income tax, EDP, central files, audit, passport, real property taxes, CI, TRAB, motor carrier safety rights. So we have all of these different things, and so what we were trying to do is to put people in the right places so that way the deputy director and I can focus on some level of the administrative piece, because there are quite a few large IFBs and RFPs that we're going to be needing to focus on. Number one is our office space lease is going to expire, I believe, in September, so we have to work on the IFB for that. We also have, the deputy director is working on an IFB as well. Then we have the RFP for the quinquennial that we're going to need to be working on too. So there is quite a bit of stuff that we're trying to do. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we have people.
Sorry, if I can
I'm so
interject
sorry.
really quickly. So I know you're talking about the whole agency, and I thank you for all your hard work. But here we're here to talk about the military contracting and other leakages. And
Sure.
so the specific, maybe I should specify my question. What are you doing to increase staffing, to increase compliance for these particular areas in your department? Do you have hiring? Do you have people that are, you're seeking hiring, or are you doing any kind of outreach to hire? And what is your plan?
Sure. So with regards to a plan, this is the plan. And recently we actually had a promotion from within. Somebody was able to move from being a revenue agent 3 to a revenue agent 4. So of course, it's very important that as we look at, succession planning, and then we look at where we're going to be heading in the future, we want to make sure that we give opportunities to our employees who have been in our agency for many years to be able to grow. So number one is opening up the higher level positions in all branches, but in particular to include the compliance branches or the tax enforcement and taxpayer service branches. So number one is that. So now that we have, for example, just in particular, we'll talk about the examination branch, which is on the enforcement side. Now that we have RA4, then of course we're going to open up the RA3 position that was open because of that position being now vacated because she's in another position. And again, that's to try to get the next level up. And then, so we move the RA3s, hopefully they are able to qualify to be RA4s. We hope that our RA2s can qualify to be RA3s. And then at the entry level, that's where we hope to bring in more people from that's where it becomes open, and we're able to bring in people from outside. And so that is the plan, and that is something that we have been trying to do, ma'am.
Yeah, okay, so we need to maybe keep tabs on that to ensure that it's consistently being addressed. As far as training, when was the last time you had training for your staff?
So the last time that we had, if you want to call it training from the IRS, the last time we had training was October 2019. We had and prior to October 2019, this is for revenue officers, we had not had training maybe for 6 years. And also prior to, in that 2019, we also had 4 people who went to federal law enforcement training. And it had been probably about 20 years prior to that that we had training for federal law enforcement training. So we do have monies from the TAP grant that is available for training for our revenue officers, which is our collections branch people, our revenue agents, which is our examination people, and that's something that we're needing to work on so that we can schedule and get the IRS out here to do some training. So again, it's been since 2019 that we last had IRS revenue officers here doing training, but that's something we're working on.
Okay, and how soon can that take place, you think?
Well, we already have the funding, and last year, as we were communicating with them, I think part of what was happening, because we actually, I believe we received the TAP grant funding end of 2021. Part of the issue was coming into 2022, it wasn't clear, the IRS wasn't clear as to whether there would be anybody who was willing to come to Guam to train because of the pandemic, right? Now that we actually, to kind of lay the foundation for what I'm going to say, so we usually on an annual basis have what's called an All Island Tax Administrators Association conference, and that's all the tax administrators that basically the revenue tax heads from the various insular areas, and it's usually annual. Until the last time we had in 2019 we had All Island Tax Administrators Conference, where again all of the tax administrators travel to meet in a central area. We didn't have any in 2020, we didn't have any in 2021, and coming into 2022, we weren't sure what was going to happen. In early 2022, we saw that the IRS, and not just the IRS, in 2022, it appears now that there's an appetite, or there is actually a desire, and people are starting to travel, and we're seeing even federal agencies, the U.S. State Department come to Guam, USDA come to Guam, and so now I think we've already, at least I think, identified for the revenue officers the individual who is willing to come to Guam, and now it's just trying to make sure that we coordinate with that person's schedule so that they come to Guam. So my hope is that at least for the collections branch, the revenue officers, that we'll be able to do something by end of this year or early next year. The problem is early in the year is not a good time for our team to do training because of tax time. So, of course, we need to try to make that happen before the end of the calendar year.
Okay, so, earlier this year, Benjamin Nicholson stated that the military's intention to spend about $1.2 billion to $2 billion. And so, I just want to kind of reinforce what the public auditor stated is like, why are we resigning to allowing these businesses or the contractors not to be taxed for the full amount, right? 4% of the full amount that's being spent here in Guam. And so I know that you mentioned earlier in your presentation that there was an AG opinion. And so regarding this, that they are not, I guess they're free from being taxed, or they're tax exempt. And I do want to maybe perhaps look at this and see what can we do to move forward to make this a reality, because if it hadn't been for our land, they would not have this income coming in. And so, what do you see, I guess both for the public auditor and for you, Director Shimizu, what do you see as a way to move forward in this aspect? Is it all congressional? Is it a congressional, attempt, or is it, what can we do here locally?
So
to make changes?
I think to go back to your statement in terms of us being resigned to not collecting, or I don't exactly know the entire statement, but we are not resigned to not collecting money. In fact, as I mentioned, in 2019 when I started, we actually began an effort to address the issue of military contractors and collections of taxes. And then 2019, our collections branch actually was involved in that effort. In 2021, early 2021, late 2020, our team actually worked to enhance the program. And as I mentioned, so this particular effort is not going to be an effort that's kind of is done quickly, right? There are phases to this, and we had mentioned even in our response to the public auditor, and as we've been communicating, that there's going to be phases to this project. And so we've completed phase one, and of course phase one was kind of completed almost simultaneously with the public auditor completing their performance audit, and then phase two is slated to start in this quarter, April. And again, this is an ongoing kind of effort, right? It's not something that we would undertake now and then, not continue, right? Again, the idea is that we work this year, of course, one, to get training, to hire more people, to try to get people to grow our all of our branches so that we are able to, implement and administer the mandates that are required of us and make sure that we collect taxes. So I hope that answers your question, Senator Perez.
All right, thank you. Public Auditor, do you have a comment or any recommendations regarding that? No? Okay. I just want to make a comment that, it's been said that the peak of military construction is happening today from 2023 to fiscal year 2025. And so it's really critical. That's why I'm saying it's an all hands on deck approach. We need to get the people yesterday, right? We need to get the staffing yesterday. Otherwise, we're going to lose, I would estimate if we can collect, if we were able to make the efforts to collect on the full amount rather than just a portion of the amount that's being spent here or made here on Guam, we could be collecting 80 million of that $2 billion. Again, like what Senator Fisher said, 80 million going to our schools and all these facilities that need capital improvement projects. And so I would like to continue working with you. We do have several initiatives, and we need to make sure that we're consistently moving forward with those initiatives, especially with, staffing. And so I hope to be introducing some legislation, as well as working with you, as well as Dr. Okada, on developing this pipeline into DRT, and to also ensure that there's more training, consistent training for the staff. I mean, this needs to be prioritized. It's an all hands on a deck, and you can't do it with just a few staff. So this is, I think, one thing that needs to be prioritized. And again, like the phase 2 CIP, I mean, that call to DFAS, right? The call, that connection can happen real quickly, I imagine, if you already have, the support from the Rear Admiral. And I think, we're coming upon budget. I know Senator San Augustine's waiting very patiently to ask a couple questions, but, now is the time to really, cost out the needs for DRT to make sure that compliance is done timely. And so, yeah, we'll definitely be continuing the discussions after this.
Thank you, Senator Perez. I also wanted to just kind of share something because, as a layperson, and I read the paper and I see these contracts that get awarded and they're 20 million or $1 billion, right? And I think, okay, I think the layperson may think next year we could take 1 billion times 4% or 5%. And I just want to make sure it's very clear, of course, that, and again, that's why I did go through the process of going through a bit of a lengthy presentation, but I think that that lays the foundation for providing some information because again, it's a lot, there are a lot of factors to consider, and so just wanted to share that. But I also wanted to say thank you, Senator Perez. Of course, you've been our oversight for as long as I've been at the Department of Revenue and Taxation, so thank you for your continued support.
Yeah, thank you, Director Shimizu. There was one thing I wanted to say regarding going back to the pay scale. So I really would like to work with you on that one, because I think what the staffing does is more than accounting. They do auditing and more specialized work, which I think would warrant a particular type of pay scale. Yes, Public Auditor.
If you read Mr. Burns's recommendation to the governor on the general pay plan, he does make mention that the Office of Public Accountability is going to have a market premium plan. And in that, it's anticipated that what it's going to do is try to get parity with the market, both the business sector and the larger agencies, GWA and GPA and PAG. And so I think, though the director has been very supportive of her staff going on the GPP, I think, yes, we should all be on that the GPP should move forward, but the MPP must also be at some point implemented. And Director Burns mentions in his, I think, in his very lengthy letter to the governor, explaining that the market premium plan is something that he wants to put together to explain how we can compete with the market. And if anybody needs to compete with the market, it's going to be her people that have accounting degrees. And, you know, that's not to say that my people shouldn't, but I'm just saying that if mine are going to be, there should be. And if Department of Education is going to be handling $2 billion worth of money in a year because of all their grants and stuff, they really need accounting people and auditing people that can compete. And if Department of Administration is going to be running a department that's going to be running $2 or $3 billion a year, they need people. And so it's imperative that all of us be in a market premium where we can compete with the outside and amongst each other. That there is no reason why DOA pays more than DRT and OPA pays more than DOA and DRT, and GWA and GPA and PAG pay more than the three of us.
Yeah, thank you for that, because I know DRT is losing staff to DOA, and from what I understand, the work is not as involved. So yeah, you're right. We need to address that parity, lack of parity.
So just
The other one, sorry, if you can indulge me, one more thing as Oversight Chair, use tax. So a lot of these military contractors has a use tax been even followed, monitored?
So and thank you for that question, Senator Perez. So we did recently, our team had a conversation with Customs, of course, because one thing that is very critical as we work on the issue of use taxes is obtaining a system for Customs. My understanding, and of course we actually, I think late last year, had meetings with a group that came to Guam and is helping Customs with this procurement of this system. Now, that's very critical because, as I understand it, the process is very manual. So what happens, there are forms called Forms UST, which is the use tax form. Those forms get, of course, provided to the individual who is bringing in an item into Guam by Customs. There are some items that we had talked about with regards to use tax that we think need to be addressed or could be addressed perhaps policy-wise. Number one is the $1,000 a month exemption up to $5,000. I don't know if that can be revisited. The issue of the use tax, actually, some of the issues that we have at the port, it is possible to stop a shipment, not release a shipment to a person who's bringing in an item because the use tax has not been paid. And that's the seaport. In the airport, there, as I understand it, there was a federal case that does not allow for an item to be held at the airport if there is a use tax that is outstanding, or if the use tax has not been paid. And then further to that, anyway, so again, there are several issues that we have. And so what happens, just kind of as a basic process, is we do receive like boxes of use tax forms from Customs. Those forms our team actually enters those information into our system so that we can generate a bill. Now, sometimes the payments are made, sometimes they're not made. We send notices to people, and then those individuals come in, and then, of course, we work with them. Sometimes people don't believe that they owe the use tax. They don't believe that they should pay it, or they're not sure because the time frame for them to get an invoice maybe has been quite long, so they don't remember. But again, that's something that we need to work on. Of course, we talk about manpower. And with regards to these two particular performance audits and the use tax, we have the same group of people who are working on these particular items. And so, so of course, that's something that we need to work on.
Yes, okay, definitely we'll follow up. Thank you,
you.
Mr. Chair. And thank you to all your staff for all the work that they did in preparation for today and for the audit as well. Okay, thank you so much.
Jesus Masi.
Thank you. I'll recognize Senator Joseph Augustino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for being late here, but I was watching on YouTube. I was up at DRT filing my taxes. Even though I filed the extension yesterday and I paid, I filed it today. So nobody can use that as an excuse. But I noticed they mentioned the Attorney General's opinion. Do you question his opinion? He's not a tax attorney, I know that already, okay, so
No.
do you question it?
We don't question that opinion, and in fact, we met with the director of, or the administrator for the appeals board as well, and she provided us with a similar opinion that also is consistent with that, with the opinion on the CLB licensing. We just provided that because, again, we want to make sure it's clear who are the licensing authority for the different contractors that are involved in military construction
So
contracts.
you're agreeing to the Attorney General saying that you can't hit the contractors if they're exclusively on military installation?
Well, we have not opposed that particular
Maybe
item.
you should, because if there's a reporting that we're not getting the money, you should oppose it. And if you need to, go to court. Enjoy yourself in court. Let them prove otherwise in court that you don't have to collect the money, okay? I would say that only because you can't just sit back and say, okay, you can't do that, because if the millions of dollars are being short, then you comply to that, and I don't like that. But anyway, moving along real quick, I want to keep it simple. When you identify positions and they mentioned the MVP, you know that the OPA identified the the
Market premium plan.
premium pay? Okay, I look at it this way. For DRT, because I favor DRT, okay, and you know that, I work there. If you identify specifically where you want to increase your manpower and you identify the amount, then we'll put it in the budget so that you can access it. So you don't have to worry too much about BBMR saying, well, we don't have enough funding today. No. That's specifically appropriate to that section of DRT, okay? And if you don't do that, don't blame anybody but yourself. And when the speaker talks about it, I'll look at him like we did last year, I think, on his bill for OPA. It was very specific to OPA. And we'll do the same thing with DOA. If you don't identify it in the budget, I'm just going to look at you at the budget hearing saying, well, it's not that important. If you're saying you need more people for compliance, well, identify that specifically. You need this amount of money for compliance for the following reasons. You justify it, I know what you guys do up there. I know you're shortfall. You're shortage of people. I know for a fact you need to move out of that building. You don't need to keep staying there. You need to go to Trifon to convince Tomorrowland Trust or somebody at Land Management to find you 10 acres. And then you can use your rent money to pay for your lease-to-own building. And you'd have a building, maintenance-free and everything for the next 10 or 20 years. And then we can work at the next thing to go, because I'm really worried that if a typhoon was to come, everybody's record is going to be gone. If there's a fire, I really hope GFD has checked the sprinkler, that it does in fact work, because I know for several years it didn't. Somebody needs, and I'm saying this out loud, so I'm hoping GFD is listening. You better go check the sprinkler, because if it doesn't work, that's a breach of contract. If I'm correct, they're required to keep it running.
Right, and we did actually in 2019 find that there was no water in our, the water reservoir that was outside, and our sprinkler system was not working, and the fire suppression system wasn't working, which is why we actually ended up having fire watch at that time. And if you recall, we had to limit the number of people that came into our building. GFD had to come on board, and so we had to make sure that that got remedied. But yes, we understand.
Based on the contract, it's supposed to be working. Let the vendor hire somebody, not you.
Yes.
Okay, and you got your CIB, they can do their 24-hour watch there. You can spread them out. Then I don't think your tax enforcement administrator will have any problem with that. Let them do the job that they're supposed to do 24 hours anyway. And then on the other issues, I can go on and on, but I'm not going to do that. I don't need to. You need people, identify them, identify the MVP program, and if you want, just apply it to yourself first before OPA gets it in DOA. If they snooze, they lose. If you move, You're in the motion, okay? It's on you, Daph. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. At this time, we'll go ahead and proceed to the excess tax.
Excise tax.
The OPA report 23-02. Ms. Lazama, you'll be recognized now.
Hafe, good morning, Mr. Chair, Vice Speaker Barnes, Senator Joe St. Augustine, Senator Perez, and Senator Fisher. My name is Marie Lizama. I am the Deputy Director of the Department of Revenue and Taxation. And I present this to you today, or I'm the person that is going to talk about this as the Director has recused herself on the subject matter. Okay?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Ms. Daphne, can you just, before you leave, can you just answer a quick question? Just to, how come you have to leave?
Okay?
Just for clarification on the record. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Reason for leaving?
Oh, so yes, so I've recused myself from this particular audit, and again, that's because of potential or perceived conflict of interest, because my family may be involved in the industry, and so that is why I have recused myself from this particular matter. However, Deputy Director Lizama has been designated to address this.
Okay, thank you. And then before you leave, I'll just allow this. Senator Fisher has one follow-up question for you.
Sure.
Thank you, and thank you for staying back, ma'am. I was very interested in what Senator Perez asked you about the use tax. I assume, does Guam have a use tax, and if so, what is our rate?
So we have a use tax, and the use tax rate is 4%.
Okay, which matches BPT, essentially?
Well, right, yes.
Okay, use taxes are difficult to collect because the consumer needs to report them, right?
You know, there is an issue with use tax, and there are several issues with use tax. For example, again, the process is quite manual, and of course, that's why there is need for a system. We've had issues with regards to incomplete use tax forms with no social security numbers.
But
it's hard to, yes, so it is challenging to try to collect on use tax.
Primarily because it requires the person to confess that they need to pay a tax, right?
Well,
in other words, there's no withholding or anything. I just need to tell you that I owe the money. Is that correct?
right, there is no withholding, and again, use tax is due at the same time BPT is due. So for example, say today is April 19, and I
Okay.
bring in something today, I will not be required to pay that use tax on that until the next month. So there is a little bit of a gap. I mean, it's not due at the time that an item is brought in.
Okay, then I'm gonna wrap it up here, Chair. Here's a hypothetical. If a federal contractor here on Guam buys objects off island where there is no sales tax and they intend to use the item on base, can Revenue Tax impose a use tax on them?
So how it works is when there are shipments into Guam, the use tax forms are actually provided to those shippers by customs. And so Customs actually, I believe in the law, is the agency that is the collection agency for a use tax. However, in terms of practicality and the actual process, what happens is those forms that are provided to the shipper, they come in and we get copies of those at our agency. And then what we do is we enter that into our system so that we can have a tracking mechanism for it, make sure it's invoiced, make sure it's collected, and so that's what happens. So of course the idea is, especially for large shipments, that unless that it is for resale, if it is to be used, then those should be subject to taxes. And I think, my impression is that if it's a very large item, that likely customs will be able to capture that. But again, I'm not on the customs side, and I'm not involved in that portion of the process.
Thank you. And I only allowed that because it's a use tax and it's one of my questions too. So I know that's another gaping hole that the OPA director brought up before my time here. So definitely, we're trying to collect as much money as possible. And that's the only reason why we're here today, is to see what we can do to really find more benefits for our people of Guam and make our government more furnished with whatever it needs, right? So that the people have a better life. Thank you again for your testimony and your... Mr. Lazama, now you're recognized.
Okay, so as with the previous discussion, I think what I'll do is I'll just go right on ahead to, and because the audit has certainly been out there already, I didn't do a presentation, but I did, however, prepare some notes just to kind of touch base on two pieces or two areas that are involved with this particular subject matter. And if I may, I know not everyone was at the hearing for Bill 4737, but I just kind of like to reiterate some of that. So the sheet that I had handed out just basically describes the bonded warehouse process. And so I should explain that the BPT staff consists of 7 employees and a supervisor, right? So the bonded warehouses, and I should say, taxes are not collected upon a shipment's arrival for bonded warehouse wholesalers. So what happens is visits are usually, and as you will see in the handout, it goes through the process, it highlights the steps, what happens when a shipment arrives. And I just wanted to note, these visits are usually requested by the wholesalers between Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Friday, if a company has an additional shipment. There are 2 employees that leave the office typically around 9 a.m. They return for their scheduled 1-hour lunch break and then go back to that warehouse or to another company's scheduled visit. They conclude usually around 4:30 p.m. And it is estimated that the team spends anywhere between 3 to 6.5 hours a day, depending upon the size of the container, the total amount of products to be deposited or withdrawn, how many visits are scheduled, and if there's any expired inventory that needs to be destroyed. In short, this is basically a full-time process for them. Although, as you probably have heard in the hearings testimony by some of the wholesalers, it's still not quite enough, and so that's just a brief background on the bonded warehouses. With regard to the cigarette stamps, the law was passed in 2017, an IFB was issued, there was a single bid, and that failed. The bidder did not lodge a protest. And we contemplated our next move, and our discussions involved some speculation that perhaps the business was not large enough such that it would attract any other bidders or any companies to submit bids, or that perhaps a wide enough net was not cast. As we considered issuing another IFB, we also considered possible alternatives in the event of that failing yet again. I should note the Attorney General's office was instrumental in that first IFB and encumbered approximately $60,000 for the startup, excuse me, in the event the bid should be awarded. It is important to note, however, that there is no provision in the law that provides for funding beyond that. We were informed by the Attorney General's office that the startup funds are no longer available. So what has transpired recently is we encumbered the amount and submitted an IFB. So that has already been submitted to GSA. Excuse me. And so what I'd like to do, as opposed to kind of going through, I do know that the audit touched base on some of the findings. And some of them were, or actually they were just kind of reiterated in the recommendations found on page 29 of their report. And though the 2, I should note that the one finding was not, I did not print that or put that on the sheet because we had addressed that in our management response that is found at the end of the auditor's report, or the report. And so I did just want to kind of say that, let's see here, sorry. A couple of the recommendations, we're centering around enforcing strict licensee compliance with the Guam business law to ensure that all licensees are current with tax debts. And, our response today is we do that. The second finding is that we should use tracer forms and require taxpayers to submit copies of bills of lading where applicable and invoices upon filing tax returns for all alcoholic beverages and tobacco products. And our response to that is we met twice now with Customs. Actually, the second one was a verbal discussion. The person that I am in contact with is actually off island at this time, but we have agreed, he has asked that we have our next scheduled meeting in May. And so what's going on with Customs, as Director Shimizu mentioned, they are in the process of procuring an automated system. And in my discussion with the Customs representative, the people involved with that who have come in from off island, there's extensive discussion to that because it's not as simple as procuring a system, plugging it in, and just entering data. You have to make sure that we are able to interface. As Director Shimizu mentioned, sometimes what happens is it comes in, and then the forms that we get from Customs, there is some confusion. And some of those things are as simple as, perhaps the DBA, the name of the company isn't quite fully spelled out on the form. They transposed, a number, tracking number, and so forth. And so we do struggle with that. And as she mentioned, we are going to address that matter. Now, that is really all I have today. I do want to thank the public auditor and his staff, particularly Selena Onadera-Salas and Vince Duenas, for their objectivity and their patience as they, asked, they discussed with us our practices and gain a better understanding of why things are the way they are done, or done the way they are, and just, kind of getting a better understanding on both sides, of what is being asked and, what exactly, again, is being done. We likely, don't agree on everything, but with that said, certainly the audit discussion or interview did show a need perhaps to streamline some processes and or implement tighter controls and so forth. And, at yesterday's, I'm sorry, not yesterday, but the public hearing on Bill 4737, I wanted, I know some of the senators, and I know Senator San Augustine was chiding me a little bit by saying, why haven't you asked for people, and so forth. And I just wanted to say that, our job has always really been to comply with the law. And we do our best with what we have. Our people work hard. And in fact, at I think the previous budget hearing, we were asked, why is it that we have so many LTAs, the limited term appointments? And quite frankly, that is the fastest way to get help. And I don't know if our agency should be the exception to that rule. We were certainly told that we should try to eliminate or reduce that number. And, there's just so many things that affect our ability to attract, recruit and retain staff. So, with that said, this is certainly a complicated issue or a complex issue, as one of the wholesalers put it. I do believe I was asked if I could vouch for the integrity of the staff that carry out the bonded warehouse process, and I do. I absolutely can vouch for the integrity. Now, one can argue perhaps that there's still some kind of leakage going on. I do not know what the answer is, and I don't think that there will be any one solution that will close all the holes. But I think at this point in time, the bonded warehouse, while it is certainly taxing for our staff, I think it works. And I think Vincent Selena can attest to the fact that when we initially started discussions on this, I just told them right up front, I said, the issue that we have is that how it's presented out there, it makes it seem as if our staff is not collecting a single cent on tobacco tax. And, of course, we can't control what others say, how people, comprehend, and so forth. But, it does actually affect the morale of our hardworking staff. And so with that, I would just like to say that, as we discuss solutions and perhaps you contemplate potential legislation, that you take into consideration all aspects and ensure that we are able to do our job and just carry it out as effectively as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lozama. Speaker, do you have any comment on that?
Yes. My first, what I really want, but absent that, since Bill 47 has been withdrawn, I think maybe, I don't know how many of you were here when we were hearing Bill 47, but I think Mr. Shimizu, who was at that end of the table, had a very, very prescient response. He goes, we comply with them at the bonded warehouse. They come and they count. They come and they have all these. The problem is they don't reconcile. And he says, it's not my problem. The bank sends me a bank statement. It's my responsibility to reconcile the bank statement. Revenue and Taxation gets the bill of lading from Customs and Quarantine. It knows what was in the bill of lading. It confirmed it when it emptied the container. So they know there should have been 5,000 cases in this warehouse, in the container. They've been letting out all of the releasing every week, every month, every Friday, whatever day they go out. But he mentions, but they've never reconciled. Did they check to see whether or not, now that the container is empty, that they've accounted for the 5,000 cases and paid for the 5,000 cases? The problem is they're not reconciling and they're not auditing. Their BPT people who are out there are religiously counting down every case that goes out. But nobody is going back and saying, we started out with 5,000 in this container. We've released 5,000. Have they paid for 5,000? And not that I'm trying to demean any of the hard work that they've done, but by admission of one distributor, they admitted to not paying, for underpaying $14 million. And again, it's only conjecture on my part, but I believe their admission was only spurred by the fact that the tax stamp was going through and they didn't want to be caught with their pants down, that they had been filing for years and that they had been underreporting. They decided, I'll come clean. I haven't been reporting. I'm saying this is how much it is now. But they never audited that. They accepted the amount. It was never audited. I don't know what else to say.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield to Vice Speaker Tina Rose Mujmar.
Si Diyos Masi, Mr. Chair, thank you again for sharing your thoughts as it relates to this matter and being bold enough to share your previous statement. I want to look at the recommendations as presented by DRT and, of course, your recommendations on the audit. And one that comes to mind, based on the processes on 2 GCA and 5 GCA, it talks about the recommendation to repeal any and all provisions of law that allows the delay of tax payments and that all taxes due for alcoholic beverages and tobacco products be collected immediately upon receipt of shipment at all ports of entry. And I wanted to ask your personal sentiments as to this matter based on what it has been the process normal on the reporting process, and then of course on the collecting processes based in statute right now, because that was one of the recommendations that you gave. And do you think that that's imperative that that legislation be introduced?
It's been a recurring recommendation from the Office of Public Accountability to do that. It was very disappointing that last week the bill that was going to do that was withdrawn.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. And the second recommendation was that for legislation was the authorization to conduct the financial audit to the HFF, which is the Healthy Futures Funds, and we know that that fund was created not to be commingled with any other fund, but to provide for the education and health programs within the government. Your thoughts about having the continual audit, is it not being done every year to date, or policies is needed to make that happen every year? Is that your recommendation, to have it done on a yearly basis?
It has not been done in the past,
Oh,
but it will be this year.
okay.
This year we have signed a contract with EY to do an audit of the Healthy Futures Fund. Well, it's the TA, yeah.
The HFF, yeah.
Yeah, the Healthy Futures Fund and the TAF. It's going to be, we're replacing the Guam Highway Fund audit with the Healthy Futures Fund audit.
So I guess my question to you, Mr. Auditor, based on the recommendation, instead of switching out, and I know, again, a lot of this is incumbent upon the work that's already that needs to be done by your office. Does it have to be traded out, or can you be able to do both with the required staffing that you have today? I'm trying to see, because if I need to...
Things. Auditing the Healthy Futures Fund to make sure that all the TAF money goes to, the requisite amount goes to a Healthy Futures Fund is being done, and it's going to be a financial audit. I will announce to you today that I have instructed my staff that we will this year at some point begin auditing the collection of alcoholic beverage tax, because I do not and I cannot believe that the only amount that is being collected from alcoholic beverages is a piddly amount of 4 million. With the amount of alcohol that goes on this island, it's impossible. And so we're going to do it. We're going to do the reconciling. We're going to get the bill of ladings from everybody, and we're going to multiply every single can, every single bottle, and we're going to try to see how much we think it ought to be. And I'm almost positive that it's not going to be 4 million.
Thank you, Mr. Auditor, for that response. I think it's critical that as we move forward in this effort and the recommendations on what you need here, that we provide that for you. And I'm hoping that I can work closely with the Oversight Chair, or even make sure that the introduction for this legislation is provided for you, because those audits need to be done, as you stated. And I do know that there were other recommendations for Department of Revenue and Taxation. You talked about the tracer and the need for that. I mean, I must say that sometimes if you don't specifically delineate what needs to be done and it becomes a gray area, then it won't be done. And sometimes the comment was said, you never should have to legislate common sense, but in this day and age, you have to legislate it, because if it's not stated, then it will not be done. So my take to you is making sure that as the recommendations are provided here, especially as it relates to the tracer, and to submit the bill of ladings and all that for account reconciliation component, I guess, does that need to be mandated, or are you guys going to do it? Was the simple question to you, Madam Deputy.
Okay, if I may clarify, and maybe Vince or Selena can just jump in here if I'm mistaken, but I believe that recommendation was really more so for the alcoholic beverages. Because right now we do have the tracer forms for the tobacco products, and so forth, but it was discovered, and to your point, that, if something's not being, mandated, then, we're not going to do it. And it was during that discussion that, the idea, or the issue rather, came up that on the alcoholic beverage side, there was no requirement for a bonded warehouse type of thing. So, did I get that right, Vince? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's really the reason for the tracer. So I apologize if it came across as it's not being done at all. Certainly on the alcohol side, we do need to examine what is out there, and I believe at the public hearing, I believe it was Senator Perez that brought up the promulgation of rules concerning that, and that is definitely something that we are going to take another look at and address. Thank you.
Hopefully we can get a follow-up on that sooner than later. And I think, to add to my point, it is incumbent upon us, as we look to having businesses, right, do business here on Guam, that they follow the guidelines. And it's not fair that the majority of the businesses do their due diligence and pay their part, while others find or get creative to circumvent the system as it relates today. So it's incumbent upon us to look at, or to update and modernize what is in statute today that is needed. And that's why I literally asked the questions earlier. Does it need to be mandated? Does it need to be put in? Do I need to write legislation to make sure that the authorization is there for you to do, or because it's not specifically said, that, okay, we'll just let it go. It shouldn't be like that, because if we can recover everything that is due based on doing the business here, then we should have the money and the resources to do. But as we look at the presentation that we have today, we know that we have resources that are escaping us. And it's only fair that if you have the business, you have to pay your fair share. And I just want to make sure that we as the government do our part as the team to make sure that we collect, because we are supposed to provide for the basic services, and we won't be able to do it if we don't get the resources in. And you know, the statements as provided earlier has proven that we as a government need to work together collaboratively to make sure. So if the mandate needs to be there, Madam Deputy, then let us know, because I want to do it. I just don't, I just want to make sure that if we give you and we direct you, that you guys have the willpower to come back and show us that you're doing it. If you need the resources, if you need the manpower, and if you need the time on specific dates and timelines, then let us know.
Absolutely. And, you know, as Director Shimizu mentioned in, you know, her remarks, now that, you know, we have identified a plan, we have a person back who is going to, you know, assist with additional tax matters and so forth. You know, we have our legal team in place and so forth. That's going to enable, free us up, she and I, both of us rather, you know, just to kind of concentrate on other things and take a closer look at that, see if whether or not it can be accomplished just as a matter of setting policy, you know, with departmental policy, and, you know, without having to kind of go to you for, you know, stuff like that. So certainly, we do recognize that. We're not going to paint this as we are totally without, or that this audit or the results of the audit should not be what it is. I think the OPA staff and our team have agreed that, you know, have come to agreement on a lot of things and perhaps a better understanding. And as I mentioned, while there may be some areas where we likely did not come to agreement, you know, at least it kind of just brings about certain things that can certainly be discussed more at length later.
Thank you. Please, Mr. Auditor, and then I got a follow-up, Mr. Chair, and then I'll yield back to you.
As long as we're here and you're asking questions, what do we need to do? Again, I'm not sure whether or not there's the will to do this, but I'm going to make the recommendation. Make it specific in law. If you have an outstanding tax liability, you get no license.
Thank you.
Because, you know, and I'm sure there's going to be fear of how many people are going to be unemployed, da-da-da-da-da. I'm just saying, I only have one rental piece of property, and I can not tell you how many times in the last 10 years I have been threatened with not getting my license renewed because I had failed to file some months. And I don't make enough because of the exemption to have to pay anything. It's just that I failed to file my return, and they weren't going to renew my license. And I was having problems with military housing because I couldn't produce my most recent license. But someone with 14 million can get away with it, or some others because, well, they have so many other employees, How are we going? I don't know. And with revenue taxation, as you can see in our audit, it was, well, it's policy, there's nothing in the law that says that. Well, I'm just saying,
Thank
if you can send an 8 cent shortage of underpayment of your income tax, you can audit a $10 million contract from somebody. But please do it and be even-handed.
Duly noted. I'm going to yield back to you, Ms. Marie, for a comment.
I just wanted to clarify. So someone could owe, tax and yet be under an installment agreement, and your license could still be renewed if the terms of that installment agreement are met. And actually, that is found in 11 GCA, section 70132, and it's clearance necessary that taxes due are paid to obtain business license. So, and if I may read, no person may obtain or renew a business license without clearance from the Director of Revenue and Taxation that all income tax returns, business privilege tax returns, and withholding tax returns which are due from that person have been filed, or an extension has been approved or granted thereon by the Director of Revenue and Taxation, which extension has not expired, and that all taxes due thereon have been paid, or arrangements have been made with the Director for payment thereon, and such arrangements are current. So that was the part of my reply, the management response. As I mentioned, we simply comply, with any mandates and so forth. We didn't make some of these things, we didn't create it. Perhaps maybe that is, to the public auditor's point, something that you may want to revisit or take a look at if you weren't part of the body that had passed that particular piece of legislation. But we simply just comply.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if you will allow me just one more question to DRT. Thank you. Madam Deputy Director, just based on the presentation for the alcohol and tobacco tax, and based on the legislation that was provided for the support for the tax stamp program, does Department of Revenue and Taxation support standing up the tax stamp program, or does it prefer the current bonded warehouse approach? And I bring those two subjects up because that was what was happening in the past, what's happening today, and how do we capture and look at making sure that everything that comes in and that's ready to go out, that the recording is proper. So I don't mean to put you in a catch-22, but I wanted just to get the preference because I feel that there may be differences of opinion here based on how we've worked within the community and how we worked within the government. So maybe.
Okay. Well, and to be fair to Senator Parrish, she asked me a similar question at the hearing for Bill 4737. And my answer is simply this. Of course, if there's anything in place that could make our jobs easier, more efficient, we are all for that. At this time, with regard to the bonded warehouse, we're making do, right? Could we use additional help? Absolutely. We could always use additional help. And if we could move away from that practice and free up our staff to take a closer look at the reconciliation that the public auditor mentioned, I'm all for that. That's my personal opinion. With regard to the cigarette stamps, it is, and in some jurisdictions, it's a really good idea. I'm not saying it's not going to work here, but what we did find in the course of researching this, it was not as easy to implement. And I have to point out that at that hearing, I heard what seemed to be an almost accusatory tone that we didn't want to move forward with the cigarette stamps. And, that is not the case. We have just unfortunately run into some difficulty, with it. There are things, I should point out, in Hawaii, the cigarette stamps are handled by the main depository. So whoever has the contract for the government of Hawaii or the state of Hawaii, they are the ones that have that. It's part of a whole package. It's not just cigarette stamps. It's like, I don't know, what do you call that? The service, the people who pick up the deposits, and so forth. It's all built into that. We even looked at trying to perhaps mimic that type of program. Of course, it would have been a little bit of a challenge because, Hawaii's tax structure is different from ours, and among just a whole bunch of other things. But, they admitted too that when they first started their industry, they were running into, for example, the types of stamps. You're going to have to find a way to properly store those stamps. There are stamps that are likely going to, with our humidity here, right? They're likely going to be spoiled. There are, what do you call that? As I mentioned, storage issues. And we've even heard from them that at one point in time, some of the, people that were selling them were simply cutting the stamps in half and affixing them to the bottom of the package. And, the consumers are not going to know really what that means, right? So whatever makes our job easier, we're all for that. If it makes it, more efficient, we're all for that. But I just respectfully ask that as you consider legislation that addresses that it get properly funded, right? It gets properly funded, and we actually explore all possible, challenges perhaps that could arise from it. Okay. That's it.
Duly noted. Madam Deputy, I do want to say that in creation of the programs that are mandated for the departments to do, there could also be an inclusion that the resources recovered or received from that can go directly into the program that you do today. So again, as we look at updating and making sure that the resources are completely recovered, that is owed to the government, that can always be included. So I just want to say thank you for your honesty in that, but more importantly, that we need to make sure that the resources that are due, that the taxes that are due based on running the program here, that we have that accountability and reconciliation that is being done. And again, I'm going to say if manpower is needed, then we make the direct appropriation or the direct legislation or policy to make sure that that's being provided to you and to both OPA and to DRT. So Mr. Chair, I will yield back to you, but before I just thank you for doing this and hearing this, because as we continue to move forward, we need to make sure that we update, but give the resources and the manpower that's needed. So thank you very much, Senator Masi.
Thank you, Madam Vice Speaker. I pass the mic to Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to reflect on the issue of a taxpayer evidently has accumulated a debt of $14 million based on some sort of business model. I think there is not a contention exactly, but a conclusion maybe among the people of Guam that are paying attention to this issue that the Department of Revenue and Taxation is not collecting the tax fairly. And I would just make an observation that if there is a notion that you are collecting taxes inequitably, taxpayers will stop reporting income. That is the danger of not having you're like Caesar's wife. Your hands have to be absolutely clean. And if they're not, then there'll be a problem. I'm sure you're aware of that. I want to talk about that, and I'm not asking for taxpayer information. I want to make that clear at the outset. The entity that owes the $14 million, I know that you read the provision of the law that says you can't get a business tax, or you can't get a business license unless you're square with rev and tax, and that means you're square on the arrangements you might have made. So if a taxpayer has entered into a payment plan or an offer in compromise or something along those lines with revenue and taxation, in this case, is that taxpayer current on the arrangements he, she, or it may have made with you?
Yes, if you will read my management response at the end of the report,
Okay.
it does indicate that. Yeah, and thank you for recognizing that, taxpayer information, is certainly confidential.
Confidential, absolutely.
And so forth. And as I mentioned earlier, the trouble is with all this attention on these particular subject matters, and as I mentioned to the staff, it's, the perception is we're collecting not a single cent, on tobacco or alcohol taxes, and that's kind of disheartening.
I wanted to ask you some of those questions. They're kind of mechanical, and I'll get to those in a moment. But is your answer yes, that taxpayer is current on the arrangements?
Yes.
Okay. How long has, I don't want to cross a line here, but how long has this been going on with that taxpayer? In other words, have they failed to pay the sufficient amount of tax just in 1 year, or has this been going on for many years?
I don't have that information in front of me. I do know that when I came on board, and certainly, became part of the audit discussion, that this was already in place, and to my understanding, had been in place for a while.
Do you know whether, as to that taxpayer, are there any outstanding levies or liens?
See, it's a little, how do I say, when you try, obviously there are not that many wholesalers around here, right?
Okay.
And so kind of answering your question allows someone to pinpoint, and we're kind of teetering dangerously close.
Sure, but as you just observed, there's not that many wholesalers on island, and I don't know that this was a wholesaler.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's an entity out
Yeah.
there. As to that entity,
Right.
has there been liens or levies issued?
I don't have that information in front of me.
Fair enough. Okay. Sure, absolutely.
Sorry, can I interject? Can you provide that information to the panel? No?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I would just join in the public auditor's observation. I'm a small business owner myself, and many times I've been told that I could not renew my business license unless I got square with you guys. And, that's just, I don't know, I guess that goes towards the equity and inequity of collection, but I am very glad to hear that you're active in that collection. I want to ask you about the whole bonded warehouse concept. Why don't we just, well, there a lot of people might be listening to this and don't know what we're talking about. Okay, let us suppose that I am an individual who wants to open up a cigarette store, okay? And the cigarette store needs cigarettes. And I go to the American Tobacco Company in Los Angeles, and I say to them, send me some cigarettes so I can sell them on Guam. What happens? He throws them in a boat in LA, and here they come.
If you aren't if you're not a bonded wholesale, warehouse wholesaler, then what happens is when the product comes into Guam, then taxes are paid.
When they arrive at the port?
when they arrive at the port. It's not released, and that's my understanding.
Okay, so I'm a small-time dude, and I'm getting some cigarettes, and they come to the port, and they're taxed there, because I don't have a bonded warehouse. If I do have a bonded warehouse, what happens?
So what happens, and I think that's in the paperwork I distributed, there is a whole process. In short, and I think I have a better explanation here as opposed to that handout. So let's see here. Oh, sorry, it's in the wrong. Here we go. So, of course, the taxes are not paid at the ports prior to a shipment's arrival. We are provided with a tracer form that includes inventory details. After customs authenticates the information and releases the shipment to the distributor, we are advised. The business privilege tax team is then sent to the location.
Okay, so
The shrink wrap is removed.
Okay, so what I understand, that the cigarettes arrive at the Port of Guam, they're in a container.
Yes.
And the container is locked.
Okay.
BPT checks it, makes sure it stays locked. I guess you guys have the keys. Now, I want to get I'm a bonded warehouse. I want to get my cigarettes to the warehouse because then I'm going to distribute them. Okay, the bonded warehouse is under the control of whom?
So we have the keys to that, and what happens is if a distributor wants to withdraw product, then they make arrangements with us, and then our team goes out there, and then it goes to that process that's described. So, what happens is, the inventory, is taken, and so forth, and that's why it could be kind of an all-day affair.
Ma'am, wouldn't it be more straightforward and simpler if we just taxed all the cigarettes right there on the port, or right there at the port on the dock?
I'm sure. I'm not here to.
Yeah, I know you're not
to,
here to. It's just your opinion. I mean, you've
Yeah.
got tax expertise. It seems like it would be so much simpler just to tax them when they land on the dock. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure though that the bigger companies likely would be concerned about that because that would certainly affect their revenue cash flow.
How so?
Well, they're going to have to front all that money without having sold it.
That's
So,
business,
but
isn't
yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not expressing a side either way. Yeah.
All right, I understand. Thank you very much for your answers, and thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. I recognize Senator Sabina Perez now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Deputy Director for answering the questions. So I know in the public testimony provided during the public hearing on Bill 47-37, there was some suggestions regarding tracing. And have you actually reached out to those entities? So the one testimony that was provided recommended the International Tax Stamp Association. Have you reached out to them?
No, not since that hearing. I apologize. We've been busy.
Yes, I understand, yeah.
And I will. I will.
Yeah, because obviously the bottleneck has been, we haven't been able to implement. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, no, but I was going to say, I'm just reminded that if, and I could be wrong, but if something is in active procurement, I'm wondering if I should be able to talk to someone about that. So I will check with our, I will seek legal advice and, certainly get back to you on that.
So you do have an active procurement right now?
We have submitted an IFB, yes, already.
Okay.
So.
When is that due to conclude that?
That was, it was submitted about 3 weeks ago and then rejected because we were missing a couple of items and resubmitted only within, I think, earlier last week or maybe at the end of the week. So we haven't heard anything back yet.
Okay, because, it seems like there may be opportunities to get, I think the critical thing is being able to identify what products have their taxes were paid versus those that weren't. So, the black market products, and to help with enforcement. So, I think it's critical that we have a way to track and monitor. And yeah, we need to definitely follow up with that aspect. I know that a lot of good questions were asked earlier regarding the, I know there was a entity that had not fully paid their taxes. So yeah, if you can provide some sort of, I guess that the questions were asked and answered on that one. Yeah, it definitely has been a concern. I mean, obviously, I think there were two models for collection. One is using basically government doing the job of actually doing the stamps as well versus the privatized model. And so, you know, we found that the DRT, when DRT does it, it could do it at a lower cost and hopefully reap more of the taxes that go towards, you know, a lot of the government services, you know, that such as the public health, you know, GMH, you know, prevention, tobacco prevention efforts. So I know that, you know, we are, you know, as a body, we've been, you know, prioritizing this from the various legislation, and I do plan to introduce other legislation to address this issue. But also I'd like to get, perhaps as an oversight chair, continual updates on, I guess, the progression of the cigarette stamp tax. We need to get this program implemented quickly.
Okay.
Yeah. But and other than that, no questions at this time. Thank you.
I just wanted to correct a misstatement. If you're asking about seeing the lien, it is a public document and can be gotten from the district court. I'm not sure what your question was, whether or not it was you wanted a copy of the lien?
Oh, I'm just wondering if there are any liens or notices of lien or levy against this taxpayer.
Without any of us admitting that there is a taxpayer and who the taxpayer is, if you wanted to find if there's a lien,
It's
it's up at the district court.
recorded at the district court?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, at this time, I'll recognize Senator Joe San Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the issue of the 14 million, whatever is in question or whatever is being settled, when was that? What year was that? When was it discovered that they didn't pay up to date? I'm just curious because, like the speaker mentioned earlier, if you're not up to date, you know, there's a checklist that everybody goes through to get a license. If you don't meet it, you shouldn't have gotten a license. So when was that discovered?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information on
Okay.
me.
Well, number one is to practice that. You can't, the department cannot fault or cannot deny anybody their license if you're allowing somebody else to get their license. Now, and then the next question would be, if they started the payment plan, I'm assuming they're up to date with the plan, but are they current with what they owe for the current year? You know, the payment plan is one thing. What you do in the operation, are they up to date? And if they're not, it automatically breaches the plan. Do you know if they're up to date today with, other than the plan?
I do not have
Okay,
information
well-
on that.
Well, you might want to come better prepared, you know, for when, in case stuff like this. The other issues I'm concerned is that, are you aware that public health normally conducts annually a tobacco covert operations they do with compliance branch? Are you aware of that?
Yes, I
You do?
believe so.
are-
I mean, I've heard.
You've heard, okay. What they used to do is, because I was there, they would hire some folks outside, they'll go to the stores, allow a minor to go in, observed by one of the inspectors or one of the public health folks, and see if the vendor will sell them cigarette. If they do, then they're fined. And then what normally happens is DRT would levy a heavy fine on them. And as a matter of fact, they would suspend their tobacco license.
Yes.
Has that been done?
Yes.
Please get the numbers. We're going to need to know the numbers. And the reason why is because You know, when I introduced Bill 47, it was intended to get rid of the bonded warehouse. But exactly when that one individual, happened to be my cousin, said that there's no reconciliation, every month everybody files their GRT. How high is the POW right now at the BBT, the Business Privilege Tax Section branch? Just curious, how high is the POW?
So I do know that since the implementation or the law went into effect that all returns must be filed online, all BPT returns must be filed online, our team has been able to address the backlog of paperwork that is there.
Okay.
With regard to the piles, I do not know.
It's probably gone
Yeah.
already, right?
Yeah.
Now, when they file and it's loaded digitally, is there anybody observing to make sure that when we're dealing like in tobacco, the bill of lading comes in, it says 5,000 cases, they file every month. Is there, because you don't need the business to reconcile, you can reconcile it yourself. You look at what they filed and what was brought in, then you know when you can say, hey, you owe us. You can cause that letter to generate and says, hey, there's good reason to believe you owe us for taxes. And then they challenge, then they come in and they reconcile to make sure they're up to date. And I'm just curious, is the department doing that? And if not, and please don't say it's because of short people. Don't say stop because that's,
Yeah.
I've been handling the budget for 4 years, okay, Mr. Zama? And I've always asked the same question of every agency. Where are you at, where you want to go, and how can I help you? And I normally don't get the answer of how I can help you other than this is our budget. Then they blame the administration, but they don't ask for anything when they're here at the legislature. And I'd like you to please be prepared when you come to the budget hearing for your department, because I may not ask you those 3 questions. And I'll just, because of all the hearings that have been happening that deals with DRT, I'm hoping you're preparing. Por favor, don't worry about the administration because they're going to tell you what your ceiling is. What you need to worry about is how you try to convince us to give you funds to get your agency up on track or working, doing what it needs to get done. Because for an agency that brings in more than 90% of the revenue, shameful that you're not even fully funded. And you're not fully funded because you're not asking. I'm not saying you per se, but the agency's not asking, because the administration's not going to ask, because they have to handle all the other agencies. But you specifically, your department, needs to start asking. And you know, I was there. I know most of the folks there, other than the new folks you got there. And every now and then I reach out to them and I tease them, how's everything? And they say, we're struggling. And I say, por favor, just don't drown and retire. Okay? I say that to many of them. Do what you can. Whisper to me. Don't officially inform me what's going on, but whisper to me and tell me. But I'm asking you, Deputy Director, por favor, don't whisper. Write it down and send it to me because I'll entertain it. I'm ready to work and help you, but I can't because I know the OPA is going to ask, DOA is going to ask, and if you don't get to my desk sooner, then you become second to OPA or DOA, whoever.
Thank you for that, and we will hold you to that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I give it back to Senator Paris. You have 2 more minutes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, quick question. Is DRT authorized to waive taxes?
Authorized to waive taxes. I would say it's actually more so, and I could be wrong here, but it's more penalties with regard to taxes. You know, we mirror the IRS, and I don't believe there are any provisions to waive taxes. Yeah, generally. Sorry, I have.
To your knowledge, do you know of any case where an entity was taxed but then went away with not paying a large sum of the taxes?
Oh,
I think, Mr. Chair, I think she needs, you got to be careful how you answer that.
yeah,
Because there are some taxpayers
yeah,
that the only reason why they went away without paying it because they went bankrupt.
yeah.
Okay? or they sold everything. They don't have any money, there's nothing. And that's maybe be careful, please.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Sorry.
Okay, moving to another question. I hope I still have some minutes left. Is DRT short-staffed in addressing tobacco taxes?
Well, yes, but, of course, I'm going to bring that back up to Senator San Augustine at the budget hearing. But, we could definitely always use more staff. The thing about it is, while we've been making do with what we have right now, it doesn't take into consideration when employees get sick, when they're on leave, and so forth.
Yeah,
So,
Senator
yes.
Senator Sanagi says just to say yes.
Yeah.
But
Okay, yes.
how much staff do you need to I guess,
I would
at
rather
this time
pose that
for-
question to the supervisor, because the supervisor's the one, and I'm sorry, he's looking at me probably like, you need to know.
Is the supervisor here?
No, she's not.
Okay.
I apologize. In that particular branch, as the director mentioned earlier, we've had a lot of acting, or people in acting capacities, for that particular position. Its turnover rate is high. Part of it also, again, is just trying to recruit and retain. We have people who are there, and all of a sudden they want to go to the other branches, and so forth. It's just constant. It's just a constant, I guess, work in progress, if you will.
Yeah,
So-
understood. And I think management should, perhaps, anticipate that from happening. You are going to lose a percentage maybe, but then that only means you have to recruit more.
Yes.
And retain those people,
Yes.
retain those staff. And then training too is another issue. So
Yes.
I think there really has to be a robust training program in place. And I will be reaching out to you and the director to establish something.
So as the director mentioned, there is someone that we had brought back, and she was the person who conducted training previously, so we are going to resume that. And I should just note too that anytime legislation that comes out with regard to BPT, our team has had to pivot, right? You have to kind of learn, what the new requirements are. You comply with them. Perhaps forms need to be amended, or and so forth. So, yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Ms. Masi. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Go ahead, Tom. You can have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I like tax. Does the Director of Department of Revenue and Taxation serve at the pleasure of the governor?
Yes.
So the Director of Revenue and Taxation could be dismissed by the governor at her will?
Sorry. Any of us could,
Any of us
any
could.
management.
Right. Do you think it, what's that bell?
Sorry.
Okay,
It's my boss.
it's all right.
May
It's a
I?
ringtone. Okay. Serves at the pleasure of the governor, and you've mentioned just recently that there was a lot of turnover in management at DRT. Do you think it'd be a good idea if the director was appointed to a 6-year term, subject to approval by the legislature?
Okay.
And then removing it from, remove any sort of political
So
stink, I guess.
when I meant high turnover rate, it was at the supervisory level
Sure,
and
yeah.
below. But to your point, I have heard that perhaps, or I have heard how they do it up in Saipan. And if I'm not mistaken, you have, the directors of certain agencies, they are actually classified employees, and then the person
Yeah,
overall.
I don't think I'm suggesting
Just,
that the director
yeah.
be classified. I'm just
Yeah.
suggesting that, like the Federal Reserve, the chairman, I think, is appointed to 6-year or 8-year terms.
Anytime you have that, a longer period of time, my belief is that it is good, you have continuity.
Okay.
And it's not, how do you are able to just kind of, I guess, have a better
Sure.
understanding of the way things are, as opposed to
Corporate knowledge.
someone coming in and having to relearn everything. I mean,
Yeah, of
I
course.
myself, at the agency, I don't typically oversee the tax groups, so that's why sometimes I kind of struggle, with the questions that may be posed to me. But with that said, I do try to be aware of any of the issues so that in the event of the director's absence,
Yeah.
I am able to at least have, or provide a general overview of the agency.
Which is fine, and this by no means is this directed by any, or directed at any incumbent. I'm just wondering about the system, because if you appoint the director for 6 years or 8 years, and you tend to remove the executive's ability to move the directors around, and I'm just talking about Rev and Tax, they develop corporate knowledge. These questions we've asked, that obviously, you don't have the answer to, maybe you would, or another incumbent would. That was just a suggestion, and I just wanted your opinion on it. Offers in compromise, could you explain what those are?
I actually have someone here who could probably better explain that.
Okay. Because my follow-up question is going to be, have you issued or entered any offers in compromise with, I don't think I can answer that question, but how many offers in compromise has DRT entered into, and what is an offer in compromise?
Courtesy reminder, just state your name for the record, okay? Oh, on the mic. Turn it on.
Sorry. Carolyn Rivera, I am the Tax Enforcement Program Administrator.
Okay.
With regard to specific number of OICs we have issued or entered into with taxpayers, I don't have that information for you today.
Could you explain what an OIC is, an offer in compromise?
It is generally like a settlement for less than the tax due amount of accounts receivable.
Okay, so for example, if it were impossible for you to collect $1,000 that I owe, I may offer $100 in compromise, and then the director would decide whether to accept it.
For the local GCA, pertaining to the offer and compromises for GCA, yes, the authority is settled at the director level. She can enter into an agreement. Again, there are other factors or aspects or variables for each offer and compromise application situations.
And frankly, I should know this, but are offers in compromise public record?
To my knowledge, for local GCA with 26120, no.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome.
My turn. Thank you guys for bearing with us. OPA, I know you're tired. Me too. I'm just kidding. Okay. So, have you guys ever thought about repealing the private entity, position instead of a bonded warehouse and you guys being the overseer of this operation, the stamp tax and alcohol tax?
We don't pass the legislation, right? I mean, again, as I mentioned, if there's something that could free up the staff that, we're usually all, for that, we simply just, comply. So have I made comments about, whether or not, I certainly have shared that with the OPA staff, but whatever arises from this, we are simply going to comply. Hence my request to please consider carefully, any new legislation, and how we are able to, or address areas so that we can more effectively carry them out or carry out the mandates.
Okay, so again, Director Lozama, just help me out here. I just want to re-clarify a lot of questions. Special revenue funds. Each month there is a report compiled by the Department of Administration of Special Funds Revenue Collection, correct?
Correct.
Okay. That report includes a category of how much tobacco tax was collected, correct?
I believe so, yep.
Does that also include a category of how much is collected by various alcohol taxes, malt beverages, wine, spirits, or et cetera?
I don't see or know how detailed it is, but I
Okay.
would suspect that it does include those numbers.
Okay, I guess, would you think that it would be a good strategy to collect or put, I guess, more stringent or be more strategic on the collection? Like, if I buy 5,000 cases of Cool Cigarette and you buy 5,000 cases of Heineken, do you think that would help more, I guess, collection or be more obvious on which company is not paying or who is paying?
I'm not too sure. I mean, one could argue perhaps that we're trying to restrict free trade. I don't know. But, the public auditor did mention, that we likely need to focus more on reconciliation, and that's what we're certainly going to do.
Okay. Where does DOA get the information of the amounts that are collected? Does it come from your agency or customs?
I believe it comes, we provide some of that information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think digitization, similar to a QR code and removal of paper trails, I guess, would that help ease the situation with staffing? I mean, we have Excel spreadsheets that can be shared. I mean, between you and customs quarantine operation and these private businesses, so that everyone is being fairly overlooked on all ends, right? So if I own A, B, C group, and then you have D, E, F group, right? They can see who's not really reporting. And I think it'll be like kind of a check and balance, right? I guess the more I's, the more dots and T's there will be crossed, right? Just trying to find out what else we can do to perhaps help alleviate the staffing issues that you guys are facing. I mean, I'm really trying to figure out how to collect all of these taxes. At the end of the day, regardless of it being tobacco, military contract, or alcohol, it's imperative that we collect this. And I'm not trying to say that you guys aren't collecting it, but how can we collect more and how much longer? Because this is like 6 years old, right? I know you guys, I mean, okay, here's another question. Are you guys currently under any litigation with the district court or the District of Guam?
I don't even know if I can answer that, but
No?
yeah, the question.
Do you have any legal issues currently? Are you guys being pursued in a legal form? Is there any lawsuit facing DRT versus any of these corporations?
Yeah.
You don't know if you can answer?
Yeah.
Okay, Roger.
I'm sorry.
No worries. Is the amount of tobacco taxes reported to DOA inclusion of the Special Revenues Fund report?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The Special Revenue Funds report? I guess, and how the things come in port, right? Like, so if it comes in at the port, you guys receive all of that, right? It's just a lack of reconciliation.
So that's the belief.
Okay.
That we need to focus more on reconciliation.
Do you know how many wholesalers are operating on Guam legally?
4.
4? Okay. Have any of these tobacco distributors ever come forward to say that they have paid their taxes representing 70 to 75%, 80% more of collected between another individual or not?
So I think how I can better answer that is, there has been, there have been some comments, out in the media or what have you, but I think it's just important to note, and I think we did indicate that in our management response, that
Okay.
it's really a matter of timing with some of these reports. When is it released, and when did taxpayer pay, and so forth. When was it filed, and so forth. So, in the words of one of the staffers, it's kind of like an apples to oranges comparison. So it's not quite, depending upon when you pull it, it can affect that. So certainly I can see how someone would think that, there's a disparity in what is being paid. versus everyone else. But I believe that it's really a matter of timing. So
You know, I guess another
different
question.
reports are issued at different times.
Okay.
So
Okay. Maybe we need to do that quarterly then? Would that be easier to swallow or it's harder?
we will comply with whatever,
Okay.
the law is.
Did a wholesaler ever say they did not sell like X amount of tobacco, but were reported that they sold X amount of tobacco? Have you ever heard that issue? No?
No, no, I can't.
Okay, like under like the COVID 2019, there was a real spike of revenue in a couple of months, right? The amazing thing is we lost all the tourists. Everyone was stuck at home. Where did all that sell come from? Like that's like beyond tourism market status, that spike. Were you guys able to track that kind of collection?
No and no. I want to say that in the auditor's report that there was actually not a spike. It was more of a decrease, and so that's what I was, attributing to the decline was really just COVID, the COVID situation. That's my personal assumption.
Do you know how many alcohol wholesale companies or distributors are operating right now?
Let me see. Sorry, I don't have that with me. And I apologize. The person that could best answer that, the compliance team, as I mentioned in the previous hearings, they are actually involved with special projects right now. So, that is my fault for not getting that number.
No worries. I guess based on our conversation today, I'll go ahead and forward you questions, and then I'll look forward for responses. Okay. Has DRT ever been made aware of alcohol distributors not paying their excess tax?
If at any time we get information like that, then, or actually, our compliance team, would go out and conduct, investigations and so forth. I don't know the specifics. It's usually likely with regard to, as one of the, I think it was Senator Joe S.A. mentioned, actually kind of, thinking, is, are drinks being consumed in the parking lot, stuff like that. With regard to actual taxation, I don't believe that they are, that is part of their responsibility.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Speaker.
To your previous question on licensed alcohol distributors, on page 16 of the report, we state that a total of 37 businesses were licensed as alcoholic beverage and Class 3 wholesalers, and 17 were licensed as tobacco wholesalers. 4 were licensed as businesses that did not operate as warehouse under bond.
Okay, thank you for that information. Has DRT ever had the opportunity or expressed the issue towards the ABC board to revoke licenses?
So the revocation of licenses or the granting even of licenses is handled by the board. So, any time someone applies for an alcoholic beverage license, that is placed on the agenda and it is voted on by board members. Same with revocations.
Does DRT offer installment agreements, or do you have any currently ongoing with any tobacco alcohol companies or any of those industries that are behind in payment?
Okay, I am not at liberty to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
alcohol and tobacco sales are a very lucrative industry, and all those businesses, why do you take a break on those industries, right? Like if I don't pay my water bill or my power bill, it gets disconnected. So, I mean, you know, you guys are doing what you can, but I think we really need to do better. I don't know how else we can do better with it. I understand that there was litigations. That's why I brought it up, is you guys are, I think, still in litigations. That's why we kind of really comment on it. But I think there's an option for, at one point, that you guys could have received X amount of money from this individual had this person been proceeded with. I mean, I guess you kind of comment on that, right? Because it's still ongoing. Last Friday, the public auditor gave a brief history on all the bonded warehouse that date back to the 1960s when an import tax of cigarettes was instituted in Guam. He said that all that time, there has never been an SOP established for the bonded warehousing. So today, you gave us a written presentation on how bonded warehouse works. But in this instance, the actual proclamated rules and regulations, how has it been done in the previous times without these regulations?
So it's really just the standard operating procedure that has been used, and I do, what I did with the SOP was I pretty much just kind of edited it for brevity, and I included it in the form that was passed out, or the paperwork that was distributed. And the actual promulgation of rules is certainly something that we will likely need to discuss.
Okay, I look forward to that conversation with the oversight of revenue tax. The International Tax Stamp Association is a nonprofit organization and is working to ensure that stamp tax technology promotes higher professional standards through education, research, and advocacy, and developing and promoting best practice. So I'm really curious as to how we haven't been able to get the stamp tax stood up. And I understand that it was an IFB and there was an RFB, correct?
So
Or is
there
it
was
only
an
just
IFB issued, and the RFP would have followed had we had a successful bid on the IFB. So, and the reason I was not part of that initial issuance, but from my understanding, the reason why it was issued separately was we didn't actually have all the details that we needed, for the procurement of the product. There were specific details that we weren't quite sure of. We knew what kind of stamps we wanted and so forth, and so it was easier for us to go out with the IFB. With regard to why it's so difficult, I have no idea. As mentioned, we talked about the fact that, perhaps there's just not enough business here, for a company to consider investing, in that. Because remember, it's not just the stamps, right? You have the machines, and so forth. And, what happens in the event that the machine breaks, or there's a part that's needed, and so forth. There have been challenges. So.
I would just buy 2 machines. And maybe we should give it to, I don't know, that's a really technical mandate,
Yeah.
I guess, for you guys to be doing that.
Yeah, takes a lot of time, and anyway.
Okay, unless the OPA director wants to operate that. No? Okay. With that being said, I guess this will be the end of our questions, and I'll ask my colleagues if they have any follow-up questions for the body or the panel.
Not at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I do hope to have more of a follow-up oversight to make sure that progress is taking place.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
I support that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions, but to follow up on Senator Perez, instead of, I'd mentioned this before, I don't know if procedurally we can do it or according to the standing rules, but can we just recess and at the call of the chair so we can indefinitely continue this instead of having to go through the public notice and et cetera?
I'll conclude this hearing, and then I'll make another call for another oversight. There might be other information that we might need to put into the agenda. So just for that OPA, I mean the open government law, I just want to make sure that we follow that.
Okay.
Because we only specifically stated the items on the agenda, so that's why we only discussed those items.
Understood.
Besides the use tax. Okay.
Understood. Thank you.
With that being said, I conclude this hearing at 12:13 p.m. Thank you guys for all your hard work, and keep up the good work, and let us know how else we can help you. God bless.
Thank you.